Okay, good morning. Welcome to the fourth meeting of the Special Committee on Governance. For those of us in the room, the screen at the back of the room provides real-time updates concerning where we are in the agenda and what's coming next. You can follow the agenda and debate on your computer, tablet, or smartphone at www.toronto.ca/council. We acknowledge the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Are there any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? I see none. Can I have a motion to confirm the minutes of the June 11th, 2019 meeting? Councillor Perks, all those in favor? That is carried. I'll now go through the agenda. We have two items. Item GV 4.1, City Council and Committee Meeting Statistics, December 1st, 2018 to July 31st, 2019. We have a presentation on that, and so that will be held. And GV 4.2, Special Committee on Governance, Public Consultation and Workplan Update. We have speakers on that, so that will be held. We'll now proceed to the first item. I'll welcome John Elvidge and Marilyn Toft to the front. And thank you in advance for your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and members of the committee, good morning. It's my pleasure to present to you this morning a statistical overview of the term so far, and to provide some feedback to you on how the governance changes that we made on in December of 2018 have started to translate into some of the way the business is conducted. So now some of the numbers that I'm going to present you this morning are comparisons of the first 7 months. So we're talking about from the inaugural meeting until the summer break. And so some of the numbers we're going to look at today are comparable to the previous two terms. And I think that's the fairest way, to compare this year's numbers against last year's numbers, which was the last year of a term, doesn't make sense. Because over the course of a council term, there's a shape or a rhythm, if you will, to the way the business accumulates and is disposed of in the course of the term. So I think, as you'll see, I hope you'll agree that comparison makes the most sense. Okay, so I'll just get started right here by highlighting the governance changes that we made last December. So we'll talk a little bit about each of those as we go through these measures. So obviously the number one measure here is that council was reduced from 45 to 26 members. And what council approved as a result of that were a number of changes to its committee structure. So first of all, we reduced the number of policy standing committees from 7 to 4. And at the time, you may recall, we toyed with the idea of whether there should be more committees, more smaller committees, or whether there should be committees where you're doubled up on committees to try to maintain the numbers. And at the end of the day, we decided to leave our standing committee membership at the very familiar 6 members, which is what we had in previous terms, but to reduce the overall number of committees and to process the business of council through that smaller number. The executive committee was reduced from 13 to 8. Some of the printed versions say 7. That's been corrected. 13 members to 8 members, composed of the chairs of the standing committee, the mayor, deputy mayor, the budget chair, and a member at large. The community council boundaries had to be reapproved, you may recall, to align with the new ward boundaries. And we approved new boundaries for 4 community councils. The most significant shifts are noted here. The parts of the old Ward 13 that used to be part of the Etobicoke York Community Council were moved to the Toronto and East York Community Council. Then the other sort of major shift was the area around the Black Creek York University area, which was formerly in the North York Community Council, is now part of the Etobicoke York Community Council because it forms part of Councillor Pruitt's ward. We adopted, the other thing we did was we adopted the so-called mixed model of public appointments. So we were very conscious of the fact that there were a lot of demands on members' time to be part of the public appointments process. And we strategized how were we going to manage that, knowing that took up many hours of members' time. And so the model we adopted was one where counselors screen and interview the high-profile boards, the screening and interviewing and recommendation of tribunal members, which is a big part of the public appointments puzzle, are now handled by a citizen panel that you established. And then lastly, for some of the more so-called lower profile boards, such as some of the arena boards and so forth, staff do the screening, interviewing, and then make recommendations to council through the Civic Appointments Committee. Last 2 points here, we reduced the council representation on a number of boards. I'll talk about those and where we stand. And lastly, I noted this because it was a decision council made right off the bat. The council meetings recess now at 6 p.m. instead of 8 p.m. I think we have to incorporate that when we look at the numbers around meeting time. So, overall number of meetings that were held in the first 7 months of the year compare somewhat favorably to or comparable to previous terms. You see here blue, just for consistency here, blue is the 2010 to 2014 term. Orange is 2014 to 2018, i.e. last term, and gray, in this case, is the current term. So you'll see, obviously, we have 4 standing committees instead of 7, so the number of committee meetings that have taken place in the first 7 months of the term are down slightly, but council, there were roughly the same number of council cycles this term as in previous terms. Now let me talk a little bit about time in meetings to give you a bit of sense of that. So overall, if we look at city council, so this is the full city council, council met about 20% less. This has met 20% less so far this term than it did in the same period last term. So that's attributable, well, it's attributable probably to a number of factors, but certainly the shorter meeting day contributes to that. Now, if we look at community councils, wide range of results here. I'd be interested in knowing about from members of these community councils what you think these numbers mean. But Toronto and East York Community Council is meeting about a little more than, or a little less than half as much as 2 terms ago, for example. Etobicoke York Community Council is kind of an outlier there. It's only met 7 hours so far this term. Anyway, you can see the patterns there. Standing committees, of course, it's hard to compare term over term on standing committees because the standing committees are now different, but you'll see executive is meeting about half as much as it did in the 2010-2014 term, but sort of on par with last term. I'm not sure that's really a big statistical difference there. And you have to have a pretty sophisticated brain, I suppose, to try and compare those yellow bars to those blue and green bars, but you get a sense. We know from the first slide I showed you that the number of the number of meetings is down, so the number of meeting hours is also down for standing committees because there are fewer of them. But now let's turn and look at agenda items. And we see that, even though some of the meeting time is down and the number of council members is down significantly, business continues at at the same pace. So there's still the same amount of business to be transacted through the council process. City Council actually, in fact, considering slightly more agenda items in the first 7 months of this term than it did last term. Standing committees on par with last term, and Community Council certainly in the same range as well. So, I look at that and say there's still, there may be fewer councillors, but there's certainly the same amount of business being transacted. Standing committees, this is a little bit of a deeper dive in those numbers we just looked at. So standing committees, again, admittedly it's difficult to compare the yellow bars to the other colored bars, but a number of items, the executive committee slightly down over last term, but on par with the previous term. Those are the kind of variations that we might expect to see anyway. Community council items, up slightly in Toronto and East York Community Council, which interest me. We started slow this term, I think. Members of Community Council will know. Started slow with items and then picked up over the course of the first half of the term. Now, I don't know if this is a real number or not, but I throw it in there just to kind of give you an idea. If we were trying to measure, we know the number of hours are slightly down, but the number of agenda items are kind of on par or in some cases higher. So, of course, if you were to kind of give yourself a box score around that, you'd see that the rate at which you are disposing of items in meetings is increased slightly, most particularly in Community Council, where, you know, in essence, you're processing something in the range of 20 items per meeting hour, which is comparable to 12 in the previous term. Another measure we look at is, I think in terms of, talks about the efficiency of council and how smooth the flow is or not, or disjointed the flow might be. What's the rate of items adopted without amendment? So this is a proxy for things which, you know, when they come before you, either here in committee or at council, the work has been done. They're generally adopted on consent or with very little debate, leaving the room in your time and in your meeting time to debate the things which require decision-making here. And so you'll see at council, the percentage of items that are adopted without any amendment at all is slightly higher, as it is across the board in the other types of committees. I'd be interested in knowing whether you think that is a significant indicator. Let's turn to public presenters and communications. And these are measures of public engagement in the process, and this is where you'll see some of the numbers have fallen, while some are consistent. If we look at number of public presenters in the first 7 months of the term, you'll see that we are at standing committees like this, or at standing committees, we're on par with last year. The blue bar is 2010-2014. You may recall there was a high level of citizen engagement in that term with long deputation lists, and so you can see how this term contrasts with that term. The participation in community councils is appreciably lower. Special committees like this one and the budget committee are on par. Again, a little bit of a breakdown is here for you in terms of public presenters. This time the bars for this term are gray, and you can see executive has received more public presentations this term than it did last term, but falling short of the 2010 term. Again, community councils, we look at the presenters here. This might explain why Etobicoke York Community Council's meeting hours are down, because it appears public presenters are down there as well. And that, of course, is probably attributable to the mix of items that are on that agenda. You know, certainly we've seen the impact of Bill 108, the revisions to the Ontario Planning Act, and the not hiatus, but the interim or transition period between the rules of the LPAT, going from the old OMB to the new LPAT to now the new LPAT, if you will, and that appears to have affected the pipeline of planning matters coming forward, and I think that probably reflects in what you're seeing in some of the public engagement as well. So whether that changes as that pipeline planning item pipeline increases, we will see in the next year. Special committees, we have a handful. The budget committee is the prominent graph in the middle, and the special committee on governance is the gray bar on the right-hand side. But public communications, these are the letters, the emails, the faxes that we receive, and again, the results here are mixed. Let me turn to the measure of members of council as agenda contributors. So there's two ways that members of council can put business before council. One is to write directly to standing committee. That's the easiest way, if I can do a little advertisement for the clerk's office. Requires the least processing. But members are entitled to submit items for committee agendas, and then, of course, at council there's a stage for the submission of member motions. And Just turning to member motions first, you'll see this is this term over the 9 meetings we've had, 8 meetings we've had with member motions. Blue are the motions, the so-called notices of motion, the ones that make the main agenda. Orange are the motions that are submitted for the supplementary agenda, requiring the mayor's consent that they are urgent. And then the gray bars are the motions that are added in meeting under the supermajority rule. And you'll see that until the June meeting, we were averaging somewhere in the 20-something number of motions, and then in June and July, those numbers peaked. We generally see peaks in member motions before a break. Like, for example, the summer break, as both members and staff, city officials as well, are now conscious they need to get some business processed between, we met in July, we won't meet again until next week, so that's been a long period of time. So that may explain that peak in July, or it may not, we'll see. This is another expression of these. Now, this is an expression of member motions compared to previous terms. Now, this interested me because the numbers this term, we've already had 282 member motions this term, which is significantly higher than the previous term and even more than the term before that. Now, the next slide is a bit of a variation. If you can just follow me, I'll explain this here. This is all items contributed by the mayor and members of council. And so blue represents items that have been introduced at standing committee. Those are the items that you submit on your letterhead to either on time or during the meeting. But those are the blue ones. The orange ones are items that have been contributed to standing committee by members of council, and then the gray here are member motions at council. I won't talk about everything here because there's lots of information to read. What did council actually debate? Sometimes I know council has a reputation that it sometimes is spending its time on getting cats out of trees or things like that. But when you actually look at the data about what council actually debated in the previous term, you can see that that the system we have is a pretty good mechanism for allocating time. I know sometimes when you're in the middle of a long debate, it doesn't feel that way, but the numbers kind of tell a different story. So we track the 3 types, or the 3 ways that council disposes of items. You might have a 200-item council agenda, but the majority of those items, or not majority, about 40% of those items tend to be adopted on consent. And again, that means, for those that are watching, that means items where the recommendations that are in the printed agenda before council are adopted without any debate. The council has satisfied itself that it's prepared to vote on those matters without a debate, and it does that in one vote at the beginning of the council meeting, and that clears the way for the items that are left over for debate. Members hold those items for debate, of course, and during the council meetings, about another 40% are released during that meeting. So whatever work goes on behind the scenes, questions are answered, reasons that items were held now no longer apply, and members propose to release them. And again, they are adopted without, well, sometimes with amendments, but they're quickly adopted. But the important thing is without council spending any debating time on them. And then the last category is things council debates. So let's just take a look at the numbers here. If we look at this term, this is meeting by meeting. And the blue here are the items that are adopted on consent. The orange are the items adopted during the meeting in a release of holds. And the gray are the ones that are actually debated. So that's by the numbers, and the next slide shows you as percentage. So you'll see, really, we range from somewhere between 5% in July. We only debated 5% of the items on the agenda in July. Meeting 4 was the budget meeting, so that's an outlier. That explains why that gray bar is so high, because it was only a 4-item agenda, and the budget took a lot of time to debate. That seems about right. But you'll see, you kind of see how again, the psychology of a meeting or the mechanics of a meeting actually allow council to prioritize the things that it wishes to debate. You've already seen this slide. This is the number of member motions. It's a restatement of what I've already shown you. But I'll turn to this. The other thing that we do is we track the number of people who speak and question agenda items. So we have that data, and it's all contained here. I'm not really going to go through them all here, but what you'll see is meeting by meeting. This is a profile. This was our first meeting in December, our inaugural meeting. And the things that have bars, blue is questions. That's the number of questioners on the floor. Orange is the number of speakers to an item, and gray are the number of questioners of movers, not questions, but questioners. And so those are all interventions in a meeting. They're 5-minute speaking time, bundles. And so you'll see that at meeting 1 in December, we had about 38 interventions on item CC 1.1, this very matter. We're talking about the recalibration of the City Council's governance. 25, the plus 25 means there were 25 items that were adopted either on consent or on quick release and therefore not debated. So now if I just flip through the years, and again, I invite you to look at these in more detail, flip through the meetings, through the months, you'll see this number of things. So here was a meeting where council only debated 6 items and adopted 84 on consent. And again, I would invite you to look at the items, the titles of the items that were actually debated, and ask yourself whether, are those the matters that the council of the City of Toronto should be debating and allocating its time to. And so I'm a clerk, so I don't have an opinion on that, of course, but I invite you to have a look at that. So you'll see as we go forward, meeting 5, we have 104 items disposed efficiently without debate. And then we'll just go right up to the last meeting. Here was a meeting 7 with 2 big items, followed by some items with smaller debates and so forth. Okay, so that is in your package. It's also available online for public and the media to review as well. Okay, top 10. Everyone does top 10 lists, so this is my top 10 list. Top 10 items debated in the first 7 months of the term. And again, you have a look at those to see whether that reflects your recollection of what the first half of the term looked like. Recorded votes is an interesting measure. It's certainly a measure of efficiency because we know it takes about 90 seconds to 120 seconds to conduct a recorded vote. Although with fewer members, it's turning out to be faster, I must admit. And so the number of recorded votes does affect the pace of a meeting, of course. I just remind you that in law, in the City of Toronto Act, any member who asks for a recorded vote is entitled to do so. And if requested, the clerk is obliged to record that vote. And so that is a member's right. So I'm not here to suggest that members should give up that right at all. But that's where that rule comes from. And you'll see that 2 terms ago, in the first 7 months, we conducted 1,100 votes. And it's down by about half this term. All right, let me turn to public appointments. There's some really interesting numbers here. I try to summarize them, this so-called mixed model of public appointments. It was designed to reduce the demands on your time or on the times of your colleagues. And so we have 4 streams now. We have the sort of major or high-profile boards. There are about 10 of them. They're completely processed through the Civic Appointments Committee. That committee shortlists the candidates. It interviews the candidates. It makes the recommendations, and council approves them. For corporations, of which we have 5, there's a separate panel. It's called the Mayor's Corporations Nominating Panel. Again, those members shortlist and interview, recommend to council for approval. Our tribunals, there are about 9 of them. Committee of Adjustment being the largest one there. Those appointments are now processed through a citizen nominating panel, an arm's length panel that you appointed early in the term, and they make the recommendations directly to council. But again, council retains the right to appoint them. Council has not given away that responsibility. And then we have, again, I call other, these are the sort of lower profile bodies that at the time council felt it was comfortable delegating to city staff the shortlisting and the interviewing. but those recommendations do come to council through the Civic Appointments Committee. So there is a political screen before council makes final appointments. And now here are the, I think, kind of staggering numbers. We knew this was going to be an issue because last term, 34 members of council were involved in one way or another in 21 different nominating panels. And so we kind of knew we were on a collision course because there were only going to be 26 coming back. So that was going to be hard to populate 34 seats. So that's why, one of the reasons why we recommended a model for your adoption. And you can just see here, in terms of the involvement in interviewing of candidates, the time savings there. Again, council still approves all appointments, so it's not that you've given that away. But in terms of that interviewing work, the time has shrunk significantly. A couple last points, member appointments, the things that you sit on. Again, we knew we were in a collision course with smaller council. Last term, members of council occupied 388 seats on 170 boards. And through the strategy that we presented to you in December, we've resulted in currently members are occupying 83 seats on 33 boards. The biggest explanation for going from 170 to 33 is the BIAs. And so the BIAs were a group where we converted your involvement from being members, if you have BIAs in your ward, to having right of access. So as members of council, you still have the right to attend the meetings, you have the right to the minutes, you have the right to the agendas, you have the right to attend closed sessions of those. So that's code chapter that you have those rights, but you're not quote unquote members and therefore not recorded as absent when you're not at those meetings, and you were not counted in the number of seats that you were occupying. So the strategy was to reduce the number of councillors sitting on boards. We had 4 on most boards. We reduced that either to 1 or 2, depending on the context. We converted, as I said, some of these boards to just a right of access for members of council. And in some cases, we converted member appointments to public appointments. Then lastly, I just want to, I'm asked this question a lot. There's 20 fewer councillors. That must mean that there's not much to do in the clerk's department. That turns out not to be the case. And of course, from the staff, the clerk staff that support your offices, we still have roughly the same number. There's 19 fewer councillors, but the number of staff to be supported, the size of the office to be supported has not really changed appreciably. So all the good work that my colleagues in that group do continues. But if we look at the impact on just the secretariat and the meetings, last term you appointed us as secretary to a number of new boards, a couple of boards that were in that were the subject of governance reviews. So the Toronto Parking Authority is one. Of course, Civic Theatres a few years ago. Those were 2 boards where council just wanted the council meeting or the committee meeting standard to be applied to those boards. And then again, there were some new boards last term, like the Toronto Investment Board and Create Toronto and so forth. So in terms of the work of the clerk's office, but more importantly, the legislative work of the city still continues at the same rate. There's still the same amount of business. So those rules haven't changed, or that part of our governance structure has not changed in terms of the things that require council to make decisions about, whether it's directly at council or whether it's through your boards to whom you've delegated some of your responsibilities. So that, Mr. Chair, is the last of my slides, ends my quick overview. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Questions? Councillor Carroll?
I did have one. It was on the public appointments page. Yes, on the public appointments page. I'm wondering if you could flesh out this slide. I'm wondering if it's helping to deal with this. Which one of these sets of appointments are recommended in such a way that the names are public? Are there some where the names are not public as it comes to council to decide, or are they all now public?
No, we amended the public appointments policy in 2014.
Right.
to change the practice so that when the recommendations come to council, the names of the recommended appointees are made public. So up until that point, so until the nominating group, which one it is, has made its recommendation, we rely on CODA or the closed meeting provisions to keep those names confidential, so that, on the grounds of people who aren't going to be recommended are, deserve to be protected from that. But when it comes to who is being recommended, the policy change made in 2014 was that both council and the public should be able to scrutinize those recommendations before council makes the final decision.
So all of these types are public at the city council
Yes.
juncture?
Yeah, there's a handful of things that come from divisions where sometimes we don't catch it and they come forward under the old rules, so we try to change that practice. But in terms of the ones that are done through the formal policy, they come this way.
Okay. I had another question, but I can't remember what it is.
Councillor Perks.
So I've got a few questions or things. Sorry, the slides aren't numbered.
Oh, yes, I apologize for that.
So that's okay. There's one fairly early in the deck called average item disposition, items disposed per hour of meeting. And I'm looking at it for city council. If I'm reading this right and doing my math right, you've got the three numbers, 5.9, 7.5, 10.1. So looking at it, by my math, comparing 2014 to 2010, we did 27% more items per hour. And that's with no change in the size of council. That's just a change with the mayor. And then if you compare 18 to 14, we have a 34% increase in the number of items done per hour. Is that
You're talking for city council, or you're talking overall?
council?
Yeah, I don't have the percentages in front of me, but what you described to my eye looks about right.
So the size and the change of the number of items per hour can change just by who's in the administration to almost the same extent as the number of councillors. Is that what that data tells me?
Well, there are a number of factors, I guess, that, relate to which items council decides to hold and get into an in-depth debate. And,
I suppose I could even speculate that having Doug Ford on council or not greatly affected our efficiency, but that's not for you to answer. On the next slide, I'm looking at the rate of items adopted without amendment, and I'm seeing that there's a very big jump this term. Am I reading that right? Like a significant jump?
Well, certainly compared to 2010, that term. An alternative way of describing this is in the white space. So the negative space here would be the percentage of items that have either been amended or referred or deferred.
Yeah.
So yes, that is.
Like the difference between 74 and 76, that can just be natural fluctuation of randomness. But a 5% increase or a 7% increase, if you want to do it over the two terms, that strikes me as more substantial.
Sure. Again, you have roughly the same amount of flow of agenda items in the case of council, because you've decided now to recess at 6 p.m. You have fewer hours to process the same amount of items, so you would expect that more items are being adopted on consent or being adopted on quick release.
Without council, council simply just taking the advice of the committee and not changing it when we're all gathered. That's the effect.
Yeah, that would reflect that, right? If you're adopting something without...
Yeah, I'm just trying to get a sense of...
taking the recommendation of the committee, that's correct.
Like I'm noticing a trend, or not a trend, I'm noticing a jump in the number of items that council just simply accepts staff advice or committee advice. And I'm just wanted to make sure I understood that. Going to a slide that's entitled Member Motions First 7 Months of Term. And this one, frankly, I find deeply worrying. It looks to my eye like the number of items coming to council that don't have the benefit of staff advice, don't have the benefit of deputations, don't have the benefit of deliberation by committee is growing by leaps and bounds. Is that?
Yes, it is an increase, and you're right, those things, things that come by member motion, don't have the benefit of that.
Yeah, it looks to me like over 2 terms, it's twice as much, roughly.
Yeah, I mean, I'll remind you of the rule, which is, all member motions
I
that are
appreciate-
submitted
I appreciate
supposed to
that.
be referred to committee, but.
Yeah, and that was actually my question. So have you cut this out to see what percentage of them are referred back and do get the benefit of going to committee?
It's a very small number.
A very
term,
small
it's
number
been
get
very-
referred back,
Yeah, I would say under 10.
under
This term,
10.
I would say, as my recollection, but that's a number we can do some further analysis on. The other thing we're doing is we're looking at the, we're going to take a deeper look at the nature of those items. What are they? What's the reason? I mean, we know settlements, for example, are a good example of something that, have been traditionally defined.
My
as
sense
urgent,
is that
truly urgent.
settlements, looking at the agendas of community councils, my sense is that the number of settlements wouldn't be increasing. But anyway, I would love to know more.
I guess what I'm trying to say is we do intend to look at the categories of these motions, and if we can try and characterize those, which ones are absolutely urgent. In some cases we know some of the motions that are submitted, you're asked to put motions forward by staff who've come to you and asked you that. Some are of your own initiative. So we want to look a little bit deeper at that and understand that before, especially if the committee wants to look at that.
I mean, interpreting what's going on here, there are a variety of possible interpretations. I mean, one could be that because there are fewer of us, we have less preparatory time, less time to go and sit at committees that we're not members of, submit a letter, get a debate, have deputations, and think it through. There are other possible interpretations, but this one really caught my eye, and I'd appreciate if, I've heard you're going to look a little more in detail at it. Okay, why don't I pass it?
Round. Were there other members that wanted to ask questions? If not, I'll go back to Councillor Carroll. I've got a couple, even just based on that theme, but Councillor Carroll, go ahead.
Yeah, the pagination threw me too, so I hadn't written
apologize,
down.
members.
But my question was about this. I guess you are going to evaluate. I have a sense myself, based on motions I've moved myself, based on motions I've seen coming from Toronto East Community Council, there has been in the first 7 months a ton of cleanup of Section 37, redesignating funds, which is going to reduce the amount of debate because it's such a local matter. And Councillor Cressy had, I think I counted them, and there were 16 in one meeting, because it's just a matter of cleaning up and consolidating funds that are in the new part of your ward. And a lot of that was generated by staff initiative, staff coming to us and saying, we want to update you on, here's a piece of public art funding of $1 million, and we just wanted to let you know it's been sitting here since 2009, things like that. So there's been a lot of that cleanup. If we could look at those and then look at the stat on member motions, save and accept those, I think we might get a truer picture, because it really has been an unusually high amount driven by this reserve fund cleanup of staff. Yeah.
Yeah. Be happy to look at that.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to continue a couple of those questions. I just wondered if we tasked you to take a deeper dive on the motions that were brought onto the council floor in that category. I think all of us are intrigued by it. Is that a burdensome task that you could take a closer look and reveal to us?
Yeah, it's not burdensome at all. No.
Great. So I suspect a motion may come somewhere. I wanted to talk just about the overall pattern. So your presentation is on the first 7 months of this term compared to the first 7 months of the other terms. I think we know there's a cyclical nature of the term, and things get real busy towards the end. Is there any reason that the reduced size of council would have an amplifying impact on the differences as we get later in the term? Or can we safely assume with what you've shown us on the 7, 7, and 7 months, that the pattern will probably continue matched in a way to it is the other years? Anything in what you've seen that would make us think there could be a change in these stats as time goes on?
Yeah, I think we're struggling to kind of come up with an answer to that. We're kind of, I would say, we're kind of interested to see the answer to that question ourselves and how that pans out. I mean, what hasn't changed, as I've already said, is what hasn't changed is the rate at which business has to be transacted. You know, the number of powers the council has that's required to exercise, the number of bylaws that have to be passed, and so forth. That you know, the city is still the same size it was before the council was reduced. So I would think the agenda volumes, at least, short of some you know, major paradigm shift, you know, the agenda item flow is going to be the same.
So the only other thing I would say is the cumulative impact of volume will still continue to process large numbers of items and more as the term goes on. So changes will be amplified in quantum, so hours spent, that type of thing. But they could.
Possibly. I mean, the one thing I will note is it looked like at near the end of, in terms of even the meeting hours for the council meeting, you know, the meetings got a little bit longer near June and July. So
Okay.
I'm not sure whether that's the start of something through this fall or not. We'll know in about a week, you know, how that translates.
The Etobicoke Community Council did stand out. As a member of that, I've got my own observations that I would say, I think you're spot on with what you've seen. One thing I wanted to note, to record that it's accurate, is there's 5 members of ECC. So there's a smaller group of councillors on that committee. Can you remind us the sizes of the other committees in proportion?
Aha, yes. That's, I wish I had my flashcards here. Etobicoke is 5, you're right. We have 8 in the Toronto and East York Community Council, and the other 2 are 7. 6.
It's okay. Yeah. It's all right.
13.
5 in
6 and
Scarborough?
7. Yeah, 6 and 7. That's right.
And I do know there was a change. I'm pretty sure there was a change on the floor when we adopted it. We rejigged Toronto and East York and Etobicoke York.
Correct.
And there's reasons for that, and council accepted it. But possibly, if that had not changed, would the numbers be more balanced? The ward that moved into the city was a little bit more urban in nature and maybe had a higher quantum of.
That would require a little bit of analysis. I don't have a hunch on that.
Possible, though.
Right. Possibly, yeah.
Okay. The other thing that intrigued me at Etobicoke York Community Council was there were fewer speakers. It almost seemed like it said there was less engagement. I know this is data-driven, but were there any empirical observations as to why that might be the case?
At community councils, you're talking about?
Yeah, and in particular, Etobicoke York. And I concur with your stats. There seems to be fewer people that come to speak on an item, and they're briefer when they speak. Just thinking the last one, we had some fence exemptions, and we had 1 speaker or 2 speakers for each, or people organized in groups, but only sent 1 person to the microphone. And being a shorter council, a less busy room, it's actually a more comfortable place to speak, in my opinion. Do we have any thoughts on why the trend is the other way?
Well, I think I mentioned earlier, our kind of conventional assumption is that statutory hearings under the Planning Act generally attract deputants.
Right.
I would really defer to you, Mr. Chair. I didn't do a count of the planning items at EYCC, but my sense is that there have been fewer planning, as I said, fewer planning items, fewer final reports and statutory meetings in the pipeline this first half term. And so there may be a correlation with those items in terms of the number of people that come out for those.
I think that's a fair observation. Any other questions? Great. Thanks very much for speaking to us. Did anyone want to speak on this item? Did anyone want to hold this down to get a motion together? I know there's a bit of discussion on the.
I mean, we could, if we want to ask members of the public if they'd like to compete, we can do that.
Yeah, is there an appetite to? I mean, we're fairly flexible on timing today. If there's interest.
That we permit members of the public to make deputations on the presentation.
All those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. So I'm just going to consult with the clerks. I got to make sure that we get information down and we don't miss any pieces or steps here. All right, I want to keep the meeting moving along. It's Ms. Dexter? Yeah, you indicated you want to speak. We're going to do our process to record you as a speaker. If there's anyone else that wants to speak on the item, if you could just make yourself known to the clerks so that we keep a record of this and it can help me call you forward. But welcome back to the committee. You know the process. You've got 5 minutes to speak to us, and we may ask
It's going to be
questions.
brief. It's
Wonderful.
going to be brief.
Thank you.
The document is really important. I did it for New Realities, and your numbers are even more interesting than the ones that we did. The lens you need to apply to this is democracy. I found the loss of debate a really important issue, because you don't get an amplification of issues involved in proposals. Less public participation we'd like to flag. That's something we've got to track, because that's a serious issue for us. Council is oversight on city staff. It's carrying forward ideas from the public. So there's a really central democratic role that all of these numbers in this analysis is really encompassing. So that's, just watch it. I would recommend we do another tranche of this and just see how it shakes. It's right that there's less planning. There are less planning issues, but I worry that people are getting a bit disaffected by this system. And that's something that none of us want to see. So it's a really important, just watch that public participation thing. That's shocking to me.
Thank you. You have a question from Councillor Perks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sue, so I take your point that the data, a possible reading of it is that people are, more disaffected. You're able to spend more time sort of outside looking in than I can. Are there other signs you're seeing in your community about people less interested in coming here or less able to prepare to be here or anything like that that would help me?
We're stressed. We're stressed.
What do you mean by that?
Well, we're picking up slack from the councillor's office. We're trying to do stuff ourselves. We've had to restructure the way we conduct relations with our councillor. We're doing Google Documents. I've never even looked at Google. I don't know whether you do that, but it's a mystery to me.
Try and fail.
Oh, I'd love to fail. I'm going to get into it in my next presentation, and regrettably, I've signed up for the next phase. But I think there's disaffection, there's frustration. I think council is doing a lot of the right things, but we're not putting the muscle behind it. I lost 2 trees yesterday. I lost 13 trees last week. Our urban forest has gone, we've lost 24% of our tree canopy in the last 10 years. And we're trying to get a tree pilot in our neighborhood that would deal with all downtown areas to implement city tree policy. And we can't, like, if you're meeting a councillor to do an initiative and you can only meet every 3 months or every 2 months, stuff just falls off the radar. So there's a lot of discouragement. There's a lot of lack of information coming back, which we used to have out of debates. I mean, as crazy as some of them were, you guys in your questioning of city staff, you brought out a whole bunch of stuff, and the array of particular interests in a larger council. I know we're stuck with a smaller council at the moment, but you'd be able to rank questioning. So I'll deal with this, you deal with that, and you'd really be able to occupy issues. And when you can't do that, this shouldn't be an efficiency exercise. We did it in 4 minutes, or we did it in average of 2 minutes, or it really went well, or let's not have debates. Let's have debates. And let's include us in the debates, because that's a really healthy democracy. I mean, your committee has been very good about that. We go back and forth. We have time to talk. There's a feeling that there's time. And but I looked at that, the loss of participation, and I thought, oh boy, we don't want to be on that slope.
Okay, thank you.
Sue, may I ask just a question? I should actually ask my colleagues. Are there any other questions of the speaker? Thank you. You talked a little bit about, around the discussion of Google Docs, you talked a little bit about the work that you're doing. Is it with the councillor or in lieu of the councillor? Could you unpack that a little bit so I understand?
Yeah, absolutely. So a resident comes to us with a problem, an illegal garage, or somebody's built an extension on their house without permission. What do? We say go to 311. They go to 311, then time passes, they go to 311 again, then the building inspector, whatever it happens, and it falls. Nothing seems to be happening with it. So we go to the councillor, because we've now done the first section of councillor business. Rather than directing our people to the councillor's office, we've undertaken to help them out. We go to the councillor's office, and the councillor says, oh, well, there isn't staff, or we can't do it, or the item gets lost. You send stuff to the council. So about, I don't know, 2 weeks ago, we did a worksheet for the councillor's office saying, here are our agenda items. Here is the status of them. Could you update us on this? Could you update us on where you are on that? And this isn't simply Ward 11. I think this is a kind of general, in my conversations with residents association, this is a common occurrence. And so they came back, they took my Word document and made it into a Google document. And now we're having to refine that with who made the entry, what date the entry was made, what are you doing? Okay, so since then, there was a clear cut on a development site. We lost 13 trees. That then has to get somehow put into the system at the councillor's office, saying who's going to go to forestry to talk about these trees. Yesterday, 2 more trees. Go to the council, we got to go to forestry again. Our pilot study, it took 5 months to get a junior member of the staff out to a walkabout. And at the end of the meeting, I said, what are the next steps? And he said, oh, I'll go back to the office. I said, we want to know for our pilot what trees are coming down, what the replacement plan is for a kilometer square little neighborhood. Oh yeah, well then it disappears. And nobody's responsible for it. There's such an avalanche of stuff. You guys know this. It's in your office. Such an avalanche of stuff coming down, and we're exhausted. Like I'm now like a full-time, more than a full-time job because I don't get weekends off.
So I just wanted to, thank you for the insight. I just want to understand, so your residents association is performing like a service management function. You're between 311 and the counselor's office, kind of tracking issues and it sounds like, it's a bit unusual. I hadn't seen.
Yeah, I don't
pattern.
think it is. I don't think it is.
Okay.
'Cause they
In
come
my
to us.
experience.
They come to us and say, there's a problem. My neighbor just built an extension on his house. What do I do about it? And we say, go to 311, hoping that it will get resolved.
Okay.
It doesn't get resolved. Much of the time, it does get resolved on 311, which is a brilliant stroke. But sometimes it doesn't get resolved. And then it gets into this ping pong in the middle of the turbulence and the storm and everything. All this stuff is getting tossed around in the counselor's office. And it gets lost, and then we have to track it.
Okay.
So if we have a meeting in April, then we say, oh, we haven't heard anything from that. So then there's a meeting in June. We haven't heard anything about that. Oh, we'll call forestry. And then there's the meeting eventually happens in September. This isn't, I think the problem, and I'll get into it a little bit in my presentation to you, the problem is we all have great ideas for the city. Councillors do, we do. And we try to put them into operation, but it's all like in a tremor. We're living on a kind of San Andreas fault of ideas and proposals and challenges and frustrations, and people are breaking the law, and you can't get anybody to slow their car down, and people are getting, it's a mess.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, it's not insurmountable, but we have to reorganize our whole system to deal with it.
Thank you. Derek Moran. Good morning, Derek. Welcome back to the committee. You know that you have 5 minutes.
I'm already at 17 seconds. Is the clock?
Oh, we'll fix that.
I just want to say by me speaking at this meeting, this shall not be deemed to be in any way my consent expressed or implied in doing so as fraud. God bless Her Majesty the Queen, long live Her Majesty the Queen. And let the record show I do not consent to the unconstitutional searches violating Section 8 of the Constitution Act 1982 that are currently taking place here at Toronto City Hall, as the province has never given the City of Toronto express statutory authority to do this. So 3 things that stuck out to me listening to John Elvidge speak. This is going to sound like deja vu to him, but I brought this up at the Toronto Public Library Board meeting when he spoke at that a few months ago. And he mentioned that City Council recently has appointed the City Clerk's office to, I forget exactly the terminology used, to provide oversight to a couple of boards in relation to the City of Toronto. And I think it'd be great if City Council would get the City Clerk's office to do the same thing for the Toronto Public Library Board, because I don't understand for the life of me why the Toronto Public Library Board is allowed to straight up lie to us on how much time we get to speak at those board meetings. For instance, I mean, Councillor Carroll's not here right now, but there, at the beginning of the year, was specific language in a proposal that was made by the Vice Chair, Alan Heisey, which got shot down, thankfully, to limit speakers at the TTC board, oh, Councillor Carroll's right there, at the TTC board to, no matter how many items there are, you only get 5 minutes to speak. So thankfully to the CEO, Rick Leary, he shot that down. So now you go to the TTC board yesterday, and if you want to speak for 5 minutes on every item, you still can. However, that language is not in the Toronto Public Library Board's procedural bylaws. They are literally just making stuff up. And if you don't like it, I mean, I think after the first time I spoke there for the next 3 meetings, they had a security guard waiting outside for me around the corner when I left, because I made such a stink about it. Jim Hart was there, he would remember. So, yeah, I think it'd be great if City Council did the same thing and got the city, because if the City Clerk's office was involved with the Toronto Public Library Board, that would probably mean they'd be a lot less likely to lie to us on how much time we get to speak there, right? So that's one thing. Second of all is this whole thing about deputations. Now, Thank you, Miguel. Now, honestly, you guys usually have a notice here that says on it, not notice to debutants, it says notice to presenters, because that's what we're actually doing. We're making a presentation. I just want to point out to John Elvidge also, and maybe he can correct me and provide me the information, but I mentioned this at the TTC board yesterday about the importance of actually defining the words that you guys use, because there's no definition for the word deputation, and I've looked for it in the City of Toronto's, on the website, in procedural bylaws, and if there is, and John can forward that to me, I'll email him later, I'd be happy to look at it, because that's a word that doesn't mean what most people think. And Councillor Carroll's not going to believe it, but I got into it with Chair Andy Pringle again at the police board last week when he tried to interrupt me as usual, and I pointed out to him, you know what, all this deputation talk, that is just something that you guys made up, okay? That's a red herring that you threw out there to distract us from the point of these meetings. And I pointed out to him as, like, you're all a creation of legislation, of statute. There's a Supreme Court case, Godbout versus the City of Longueuil, where it specifically says that municipalities, the actions of a municipality should be considered as same as basically the actions of the province that gave birth to it. So if you go on the e-laws site for the province of Ontario, and you do a word search at the bottom of the page there for deputation, everyone see what comes up? Nothing. Exactly 0 results show up. So the province of Ontario, all this deputation talk, that's news to them. That's just something you guys made up, because what I'm getting at here is, and I spoke to, from CP24, Christina Tenaglia, I think, I'm pronouncing that the right way. And she says, oh, that's a great point, Derek. I'm going to ask Chair Andy Pringle about that. But what she should ask is, if she has access to Premier Ford, the question I'd like her to ask is, if people can ask questions at Hamilton City Hall meetings, then why do Toronto City Council members lie to us that we can't ask questions here at these meetings? Because that's what these meetings are really all about. Nothing about deputations. You're supposed to be able to ask questions, and public servants that are paid by us and work for us answer our questions. Thank you, Miguel. Thank you, Councillor Crawford.
Thank you, Derek. Are there any questions of the speaker?
Like, seriously, nobody wants to challenge me on anything I said? Really? Come on.
Thank you, Derek. Max Allen? Welcome back, Max. I know you've been here before. You have 5 minutes.
I want to answer your question of Sue. Is Harvard Village Residents Association experience unique or unusual? And the answer is no. We have it also, and so do the other residents associations that I'm familiar with around us downtown. The bridging function, as I'll call it, between, for example, 311 and council and councillors is something we deal with all the time. In a hallway conversation that we had about a month ago with Councillor Cressy, he said to me that what was driving him crazy, and as far as he could tell other councillors, was the fact that you had to deal with hyper-local matters and citywide matters at the same time. There used to be more councillors to deal with citywide matters, and now that burden has fallen much more on the shoulders of individuals. I'm sure you know about this. It's a general problem that the avalanche of work, it's a big city. I mean, we're getting bigger all the time. Why wouldn't we expect the people who are managing the city to have more work to do? Well, they do, and so do the residents' associations. I don't have a solution to this. but it's, as Sue said, something you should keep in mind because it's a freight train coming down the track at you and to us as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Max. May I ask, before you go, may I ask a question? And I'll just check with my colleagues if there are any questions of the speaker. I wanted to just dig a bit further in the issue. I have, believe it or not, I have been thinking about this before this meeting and in the context of governance. Is it your view or experience that the residents' associations have a standing function or a generic function of dealing with service management issues between the councillor's office and 311, or is it more initiative or project-based? So, for instance, some of the experience I've had, and I've talked about it before in different forums, is a residents' association that forms around the issue of a development that's going through council, and it's kind of a project-based approach. People attack that, and I say that in a nice way, they attack the work, the effort that's required to go through all of the steps of the process, versus what I think I heard a little bit today about more of a standing process where the association exists perpetually as an interface between residents and the city, and is kind of brokering the information. And further to get at what residents are doing or thinking about calling the Residents Association first before simply calling 311 or their councillor. And I just wondered which of those experiences you see more or see exist.
Both.
Okay.
We not only have a bridging function between residents and the city, but we also have one with each other. The residents' associations around us in downtown, and by around us, I mean around here, around this building, are often in consultation with one another and act cooperatively. But in addition to the standing function, there are always emergencies. So we do both.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? None? Thank you. So that was our last speaker. We are therefore on GV 4.2, Special Committee on Governance, Public Consultation and Work Plan Update. We do have a series of speakers on that. Please forgive me, my tea hasn't fully sunk in here. We do have. I don't want to see you on 2 cups. The procedural step of calling for speakers. I'm just eager to get at the list and hear everyone. So members of the committee wishing to speak on GV 4.1. Councillor Carroll, I believe you do.
First of all, I have a motion that the Deputy City Clerk report to the November 1st meeting, et cetera, on the number of public appointments debated by City Council in the 2018 term and the 2014 term. The reason I want this analysis is it's a stunning change to me that we had 2/3 of council involved across appointments last time, and while we're a smaller council, we actually overcorrected. We're now only 1/3 of us involved. And I would say, great, less work for me, except that we're now at a point where very few people are involved in the appointments process, and yet the one juncture, the only place where the information is divulged and the public and myself on their behalf get to say, not sure about this one, everyone loses their mind at council when you do have a problem with the appointment and you want to discuss it. So I'm wondering if people are going to be so loath to debate public appointments at council at the last and only point at which it can be debated, maybe more of us should be involved in the public appointments process. So in analyzing this, what I'm trying to get at is, on a percentage basis, is the amount of times people feel they have to debate this at council going up as a result of fewer people being involved at the front end. So I think if we evaluate the change and convert it to percentages, because there are fewer appointments being made, we might be able to answer that question. I don't like the idea of having to debate a name because the name has been made public now. And so I'm embarrassing people. But there was an occasion at which I really had to debate that. I had a real problem. And there seemed to be a collective outrage. How dare I debate the work of a committee? That's what council does. And so if it's a problem, then I think we have to look at the front end. As for public presentations, I think we have to be careful how we, if we're gonna fine tune engagement, I think we have to be careful how we go about it because there are so many impacts. Public presenters actually went up for budget committee this year, which is a surprising thing given that the post-election budget is such a hurried process. But the number of people who engaged in it went up. And I don't think that's a governance change that we brought about in our structuring of the committee so much as here was a moment, and it was really a control group, like a laboratory, because we even had the same leadership of that committee over last term. But what did happen was the community suddenly realized there's a lot at stake here. They're starting to take away my representation, and they're spending my money, and a lot of people showed up to talk about how we spent their money. So different things can affect the community's willingness to engage. If you look on the other hand at community councils, engagement has gone down there, that is true, but there are a number of factors there, one being in North York, I can only speak to North York, in certain areas of high development where most of the items are being generated, people have become really well versed in the constraints around it. However, why were they showing up in the term 2010 and so on, in almost double the numbers in North York when they were still adjusting to the increase in density? Well, during that term, I could not, for love nor money, get a planner to do a working group after hours. Mysteriously, they were suddenly unavailable. I don't think I had one single fully fleshed out working group in an area in my ward where they were facing a large development. If it's a large and very dense development, you expect to be able to go through a working group of 3 or 4 meetings. I couldn't get one. That was some sort of internal leadership decision, and it massively affected whether or not people could speak during the front end, again, of a decision-making process. So they were pouring into North York Community Council on those deputants. I had one development where I had 40 deputants, which is highly unusual in North York. I had to go up into the gallery and say, guys, let's put our heads together. How many of you need to speak to this? And yet they all desperately wanted to. And so we just heard them all. And so those internal and public representative council leadership decisions can greatly affect engagement. And we've got to factor that in if we're going to start to make any kind of gospel out of the numbers we're looking at today. Those are my comments. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Carroll. Are there other members wishing to speak? If not, I will speak briefly. I do have a motion, if I may ask that it be on the screen, and I do think it captures some of the concerns raised by my colleagues in what we've learned today. And the motion is that the Deputy City Clerk report to the November 1st meeting of this committee with further detail on member motions. And it's my hope that we'll get into some of the details and some of the questions that were raised today about, were the motions technical in nature? Were they something a little bit deeper? Councillor Perks did make a comment through the questions about some of these things that are brought before council with little or no debate or input from staff. And we often rely on those reports or that advice to help us navigate what these motions are. Speaking as a member of council now in my second term, I've always found the member motions, as we casually call them, a very difficult component of the meeting to navigate through because a lot of things are put before you very quickly. Some of them come on without almost any notice at all, and we have to do our best to sort through that decision-making process. The one note I will make, because obviously I've been thinking about these in the context of the special committee and just my experiences here, I realized that one part of this has to do with convention. We go through those seemingly automatic or robotic votes to allow things on, and I know that we need a supermajority to add some of these things, and we often don't challenge that process. So my hope in the report is we're reminded of that convention that we've put ourselves into as a council, and the solution may be before us. It just may be a change. But I think being armed with some information about why the change is urgent and some facts that will come forward in a report will be helpful to us. So with that, that motion is before us.
Ask a quick question of clarification. Do you want member motions just directly to council, or also a little analysis of motions that are accepted in standing committees? Because that has changed for me. That's a practice that has changed for the better.
I think the stat that was reported on in the report was on council, but if the clerks can nod that we're okay as well to look at the standing committee or take that as part of the motion, you'll bring something forward. So my intent is broad, and I'm okay as long as the clerks can bring it. I think the more information we've got, the more useful that is. Okay, if there's no other speakers, I'll ask to call a vote on both items. The first is Councillor Carroll's motion. All those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. And the second motion is mine. All those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. And we do have to adopt the item as amended. All those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. I'll be back in 30 seconds. For sure. And now, off to item GV 4.2, Special Committee on Governance, Public Consultation and Workplan Update. We do have a series of speakers, and I will ask that Patricia Wood please join us at the front. Good morning, Patricia. Welcome to the committee. You've got 5 minutes.
Thank you. So my name is Patricia Wood. I'm a resident of Toronto, and I'm a professor of geography at York University and co-founder of its City Institute. I specialize in geographies of citizenship, democracy, and governance, and I particularly focus on individuals and communities whose identities, livelihoods, and the place they call home are often deprecated to exclude them from public life and from political participation. With Professor Alexandra Flynn, who's also here this morning, I'm currently engaged in a research project to study precisely these communities in the City of Toronto and their engagement, and comparing our institutions and practices to those of other cities around the world in an effort to understand how we can strengthen local democracy. And so it's precisely in this capacity that I'm here today to ask that the Special Governance Committee consider extending the time period of its mandate and the scope of its work plan. The mandate of the committee included that it, quote, make recommendations to City Council on any further changes to its governance structure. And that governance structure includes not just council, but all the processes that support its work, including staffing and public consultation and engagement. And given the serious issues facing the city, I believe this committee's work is very well begun, but certainly not done. So no one ever wants someone to come along and blow everything up and make the kind of mess of democratic practices and structures that Bill 5 did, particularly as it was dropped on the city mid-election. Because of Bill 5, Toronto now has the weakest municipal representation in the democratic world. No other city has an equal number of federal and local representatives. But the silver lining to this terrible time is that it gives us an opportunity, for this committee in particular, to open up a much bigger conversation about democracy, which is under stress and perhaps even in crisis, but not just here in Toronto, but around the world. It worries me to think that if the city had won in court last week, that this committee's work would be considered done. Even before Bill 5, there were serious issues, and there remain serious issues for us to consider. The city's powers, diversity and representation, on council, but also in public engagement and public consultation more broadly, unequal access to decision makers, and so on. We have an opportunity now to ask fundamental questions about what city governance is for, what it should look like, in order to achieve a more just and sustainable city. A total of 47 people attended 5 public consultation meetings called by this committee in June. This is clearly inadequate. More than that, I think we can assume perhaps that those 47 people did not in any way represent the diversity of this city. I'm particularly concerned to note, thinking of the presentation earlier too, that there are at least 4 advisory committees that were only struck about a month ago. So there's no way that they could have been consulted, including the Francophone Advisory Group and the Aboriginal Advisory Committee. We need exhaustive and deeply inclusive public consultation that's accessible and welcoming to all the people that City Council doesn't usually hear from. Now, this takes a lot of time and effort, but anything less doesn't do justice to all the residents of this city, to the diversity of their experiences and their knowledge. And I think Council has a responsibility to address the deep inequities that are sometimes produced by democratic practices and institutions here. So I think there's quite a lot left to think about and to talk about. How can we improve public engagement? I know this has come up at this committee. Does the city need more powers? Do we need a charter? What would that look like? Should we have perhaps an elected public advocate? Participatory budgeting? Should our governance practices and institutions include our treaty obligations? Our responsibility to our environment, our status as a sanctuary city? What if all of these were applied to council decisions in the way a gender lens is now applied to the budget? So I'm asking that the committee expand its proposed work plan even further, to take up that latter part of your mandate to make recommendations to City Council on any further changes to its governance structure. There are many research projects ongoing on local democracy that would support your work. I note that according to the city's special committees are established by council to provide a forum for specialized consideration of matters. The budget committee is also a special committee, but it doesn't have an end date in the way that this does, and such a quick one. Surely there's just as much need for a governance committee, for an ongoing discussion about improving our democratic practices and institutional structures, particularly at a time when they're under threat. So please stick around to be that forum on governance so that those of us who are doing this research also have a place to bring it, a place where it will be taken seriously and I hope acted upon. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there questions of the speaker? Councillor Carroll.
Yeah, you bring up the concern of there only being 47 people over the 5 meetings. There was a survey put out, and I wonder if you could comment. The report tells us that while it had 5,700 hits, a much smaller number.
251 completed studies.
Yeah. So a lot of people looked at it, but then either started it and didn't complete it, or just looked at it and then canceled. It said, I'm not filling that out. Should we take another crack at that? Do you have any opinion on how we might have made the survey more engaging?
I mean, not in a detailed sense. I think it's worth reviewing. I note that the TTC did consultations in June as well. They had fewer meetings, but they had many more people, at least 3 times as many people. And that was still probably low, but they still do better. And their online survey also, I believe, got about 3,000 responses or something, as opposed to 251 for this. So, I mean, I think it's not the only way that there should be engagement, but I think it's worth revisiting that and trying again. I mean, some online surveys can be useful. One of the things I noted from the report on the feedback that they did get from the meetings and the online surveys, where they said that the greatest, because I noted it, the greatest number of comments indicated that residents would like the city and members of City Council to engage with the public more extensively, meaningfully, and in a timelier manner. A significant number also described a desire for the city, staff, and members of City Council to engage more locally. But that has yet to happen with this city's own consultation. Like, in the little bit that you've gotten, that's what people are calling for. And so I think we need a process that actually does that, and it will include, kind of general public consultation meetings that they're held, and perhaps it includes an online survey, but it cannot stop there. You cannot reach the diversity of constituents and engage them in a way that is meaningful to them just by doing that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Councillor Perks.
Thank you for this. That was very helpful in my own thinking. A thing I've observed, and I'm going to ask you for your thoughts or comments on this, is if I call a community meeting on a very general topic, I get very low participation. But if I call a community meeting saying, I'm going to do this very specific thing, then all of a sudden there's much more interest. And I'm wondering if you think that phenomenon could in any way be related to the sort of lack of interest in what we've done so far, and if we would do better if we had some more concrete proposals and then took them out for discussion.
I would say absolutely. Part of our research has been interviewing city staff who do public consultation for various cities, because they're pretty savvy about, the nuts and bolts of getting people to participate, because that's what their work is all about. So there's actually a lot of research about what kinds of public consultation works and what doesn't. And if you ask them, like, where do you get the numbers? It is on specific issues. Some of them are obviously more electric than others and will always get huge numbers. But if you give people something very concrete to speak to, then people come out. The general, they don't know where to enter in, and you do get less engagement. And that's not unique to Toronto at all. That's what public consultation professionals will tell you is quite common just to the practice of public consultation.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? There are none. Thank you for joining us. Our next speaker is Michael Hay.
Hi. So my name is Michael Hay, and I'm the Executive Director of Progress Toronto. Our mandate is to organize for a more democratic, just, and progressive city. This definitely covers the democratic part of our work. As you all know well, the Special Committee on Governance was directed by Council to do two things, and I just want to quote this: to consider the impact on the city's governance structure and processes arising from the reduction in the size of Council, and to make recommendations to City Council on any further changes to its governance structure. This committee established its own work and its own timeline. And the December 2018 decision of City Council says that the Special Committee's mandate will end when it makes its final recommendations to City Council. So currently, the committee plans to receive those final recommendations from city staff in less than 2 months at the November meeting. And so I'm here today with others to ask that you move on this item to amend your work plan today and direct staff to bring final recommendations after a much deeper consultation and more research has been conducted. So at Progress Toronto, we spend most of our time making it as easy as possible for people to connect with local politicians. So far this year alone, and I say this in contrast to this report before you, we've helped people send over 100,000 messages directly to their local representatives, and we've connected over 5,000 people by phone to their local representatives. To do that, we knocked on tens of thousands of doors across the city, something I know councillors are very familiar with as well, as a form of engagement. As acknowledged when this committee was created, Bill 5 and the province's slashing of city council reduced access to local councillors, and it reduced the number of committees, as we heard from Elvidge earlier today, and opportunities for the public to engage. But maybe more importantly, it's actually deepened or exacerbated the disconnect that had already existed at the city. And at Progress Toronto, we know from talking to thousands of people that many people don't actually know who their city councillor is. Which was worsened with Bill 5. And they don't know how they can get involved or how they can even begin to address the issues that they face daily through local governance and through the city. And the style of engagement and timing of meetings that happen at the city also can create barriers for some people to participate. So this was true even before Bill 5 came down on us. So I believe that the mandate of this committee is an incredible opportunity to change that and to take this seriously. That's why I'm here again to ask that somebody move a motion to extend the work on this governance review and deepen public consultation and engage in more research before a final set of recommendations comes forward. So as I wrap up, I just want to share some stats from the staff report, which started to get discussed from the last deputant. So the public consultation that's happened so far has generated some big questions and surfaced a number of concerns, so that's a great start. Many groups clearly worked very hard on the submissions that they made. However, it was definitely not a deep public consultation, as the report before you highlights. Unfortunately, the public consultations held in June had very short notice, so I don't even, like, in addition to what Councillor Perks raised about in making it interesting for people to come out, the notice went out on Monday, June 3rd, and the first consultation happened on Monday, June 10th. So that'd be very hard to get people to come out to a meeting and motivate them to come out to this meeting. Only 47 attended, and 2 of those sessions only had 5 people attend. At the same time, the city was holding consultations on housing and transit, and the Raptors were winning the playoffs in that same week. And only 101 emails were received on this consultation. Of those 101, 88 of them came from a single campaign on voting reform. So you can see the level of engagement is lower. And only 251 people completed the online survey, despite 5,700 people visiting the page. The staff report says people found the survey difficult to understand. And only 8 people from neighborhood improvement areas, planning tables, were able to provide feedback. I know that most, if not all, of the councillors on this committee have heard from more residents locally on issues in your ward, and that the number of people who participated in this very short consultation window is too low. It's also important to note that the attachment to the staff report shows that those who engaged are people who are already engaged. 80% of the people who filled in the survey regularly fill in city surveys, and 60% of the people who filled it in said they regularly monitor committees and agendas. So we're not engaging the people who aren't participating. I just want to say the last thing, that our organization, Progress Toronto, has spoken to tens of thousands of people across Toronto, and as you know, last August and September, almost 30,000 people sent messages in about Bill 5, about democratic reform. So people are willing and interested in governance and democracy, and they will engage. People do care about this issue, but they feel disconnected from power. So I think a low participation in a short consultation window actually shows that more work needs to be done to ask the right questions and to make it worth it and not rush it. And this committee needs to ask staff to continue its public consultation and put people at the center of democratic reform that's being considered. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there questions of the speaker? Councillor Carroll.
Yes, you want more consultation. You think this group should consult beyond November. But I'm wondering if you want to comment on the line of questioning with Ms. Wood before. When she was discussing it with Councillor Perks, we were talking about how you get more engagement if there's something really concrete. So I'm wondering if we go out with sort of reframe what we've already been asking, or do we go out with something that is, you know, more like an EA, where we go out saying we've done this much work, here's option 1, 2, and 3. Would we draw more people? Would that be more engaging?
I think that there's 2 ways that you can talk to people, and I know that councillors know this really well. You can go to them, right? And to do that, you would go door to door, you go to grocery stores or community centers or where people already are gathered, and then approach them and consult them.
Right.
And to do that, you don't need to have a lightning rod of an issue that would draw people in, right? But if you're hosting an open house in a giant civic building and you want to make it, you want to motivate people to come out, then you need to have something that sparks their attention or a question that would make them come out. Everybody experienced that during the core service review, and we saw that reflected on the charts there with that 24-hour executive committee. So when you put the lightning rod out there, yes, more people will come. But if you could spend the time and the resources to engage people where they're at and approach them, I think you would also get a good response.
Okay, and you outlined the amount of engaging you're doing. I'm wondering if you're getting the same sense I'm getting. In terms of engaging on this issue, is it a matter, I'm asking because right now I'm doing a participatory budgeting exercise with $500,000 in my ward. We had, Rich will be interested to hear this, we had more people come to an idea collection meeting than ever came in any of the 3 years in any of the neighborhoods in the pilot, which I think has something to do with the change in our governance. There's a sudden awakening, same as the budget committee had more deputies. There's a what's at stake sort of feeling out there. We ran out of knives, forks, spoons, and plates because there were over 100 people for an idea collection night on $500,000. I think there's a wanting to engage, but on this issue, they're just not sure how? Is that really what's happening?
I think it's both a how and a why, right? So not many people engage in democracy for the sake of democracy. People will engage because they understand what impact that will have, and how that can change an outcome or something in their lives. And so if you're doing participatory budgeting and you're doing idea collection, it's very tangible and it's very easy for people to understand why they would engage. But if the city's going to the public and just talking about democracy for democracy's sake, it's a little bit harder to understand what that outcome would be.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any other questions? Thank you for speaking to us. Our next speaker is Devika Shah. Devika, are you going to present anything, or is that laptop
No,
just
it's
notes
just-
for you?
It's just
Okay.
my laptop. Can you hear me? Yeah.
I can, thank you. You've got 5 minutes. Welcome.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Devika Shah, and I'm the Executive Director of Social Planning Toronto. I know that as councillors, you're involved in many initiatives, but the work of this committee is perhaps the most fundamental piece of work that is needed right now at a local level. And as our star rises on the global stage, poverty and inequity is growing in our city at a magnitude that is becoming impossible to ignore. And as we know, in the last municipal election, voter turnout was at a mere 41%. So how do we avoid going the route of other large cities south of the border? We embrace our diversity, which, the Canadian way, and that means tackling two interrelated priorities simultaneously. One is what this, committee is tasked with doing, that we build a city that is more democratic and not less democratic. And the second is that we apply an intersectional equity lens to everything that the city undertakes. There are many civil society organizations and research initiatives that are underway right now in this space. So our request is that you extend the mandate of this committee by a minimum of 2 years to give a crucial issue like this the time and attention that it deserves, and to provide a place within City Council where all of this work can land, so that you are equipped to provide robust and impactful recommendations to City Council 2 years from now. So that means developing a set of fundamental governance questions that have yet to be fully explored and resolved, and using those questions as the basis of the 2-year work plan. And it means fully engaging Torontonians in this endeavor by proactively outreaching to equity-seeking groups, and it means enlisting the help of organizations like ours and many others who are here, who are already working on these issues and really willing to work with you to deliver on this work plan. When I add up all the people who engaged in all the different ways that were provided, it seems like it was under 700 people. And with all due respect, a topic as important as this is not a 2-month consultation in the months of June and July, resulting in less than 700 people engaged for a city of our size. In fact, approximately 30,000 people would have had to have been engaged for just 1% of Torontonians to have engaged in this issue. So Toronto's governance challenges have existed for many years, long before the ward size was cut in half. And I think staff need to be given the mandate and the resources to be able to drive a truly inclusive, equitable, and thorough engagement process, working in partnership with civil society groups of all kinds. So from our perspective at SPT, one of the many questions that needs to be built into this proposed 2-year work plan is how to ensure that equity-seeking groups are included and engaged in governance in Toronto. Sarah Ali, one of my colleagues at SPT, recently worked with 5 other community leaders to engage in one-on-one conversations with residents in 4 quadrants across the city, and they focused on the wards that had the lowest voter turnout. They spoke with people who had been living in Toronto for 20 years and spoke English, but didn't have basic info like who to call if the swing in their park wasn't working or needed to be fixed. And when they asked these individuals, well, why didn't you go to the City of Toronto website and figure it out, they were embarrassed to say that they found it difficult to navigate and that they didn't understand. And so then, after doing these one-on-one conversations, they put together a civic engagement conference that provided information in really creative ways on how residents can get connected into the city. And they reached out to a lot of the people they had these conversations with. So they had planned for 250 attendees, and they got 753 people who showed up, with a very high percentage of participants now interested in voting and engaging in the system in other ways, and also willing to serve as community ambassadors themselves. So the important takeaway here is that community ambassadors are needed to do this kind of engagement work. Leaders who live in those communities, who have a shared culture, to act as bridges and to establish trust. It's also far more effective, to the point that Councillor Carroll was just asking about, to ask people what they need instead of to provide them with a 5-page document or a survey with options and get them to respond to it with proposed solutions. So that's why it's really great that one of the actions that's coming out of the For Public Benefit framework is the creation of a vendor list of nonprofit groups that can conduct high-quality community consultations on behalf of the city in ways that are culturally appropriate for Indigenous communities and equity-seeking groups. So I'm sharing this example with you because it demonstrates the kind of initiatives that can be undertaken in partnership with groups like ours as part of this 2-year work plan. I know that day to day as councillors, you're often putting out fires and you're dealing with, the fallout of decisions made by other levels of government. But this is an opportunity really to provide desperately needed leadership in City Council and to leave a legacy in the city for years to come. So thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions of the speaker? Thank you for joining us. Our next speaker is Ali Abdurrahman. Is Ali here? Okay, we'll go to the next name. If Ali comes and identifies himself, we'll speak to him. Alexandra Flynn. Welcome.
Hi, thank you.
Did you need any help with the laptop, or is that notes as well, like the...
It's just notes.
Oh, great. Okay, well, welcome to the committee. You've got 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. I'm a researcher who focuses on municipal law and governance. It's very rare that people come to the city and ask you to slow down and not make a decision. Usually you're criticized for doing the reverse, for going at a snail's pace, but this is a really unusual situation. Governance changes happen very seldom at the city, especially the kind of mandate that your committee has been asked to do. The last governance review was over 10 years ago. And in my view, in the view of many others who are speaking, the committee should try to get it right. It shouldn't be rushing through this process with proposals that haven't been vetted in a fulsome way. So the topic that I'm going to just speak about very quickly today is the importance of having information on what you're trying to decide from as broad a range of people as possible, and especially underserved communities. So closeness to the people is usually what cities justify their role as a government as. You're not constitutionally protected, as the Court of Appeal said last week, but you have a proximity to the people, to your residents. You know what they want, and that justifies why you get to be a government and why you get to have the power and the autonomy that you do. And your role as councillors is pivotal in this, right? You have long served as the first source of contact of residents who have issues, who have problems. And now, of course, you have at least double the number of constituents that you used to have, which makes this role even harder. So coming back to this committee and the work that you've been trying to undertake so far, have you really gotten the information that you need to address the problems that are emerging because of this distance that you now have from your residents? Professor Wood and I, as she mentioned, started a project called Toronto the Better earlier this year. And what we wanted to do was kind of ask underserved communities, what do you think about governance? What would you want to see changed? Because it's our view that local governance happens all over the city in so many different ways already. And you as councillors know this, right? You know of park people, of residents associations, of other individuals in your communities who are trying to make things better. And so we thought, let's ask them. Let's ask these people all over the city, not just in areas where there's a lot of residents associations. What do they think about the Bill 5 and what they want to see happen with respect to governance? So in the time that we've started this group, we've only had time to do one consultation because we wanted to do it well. So we convened a group in North York of folks who do this kind of governance work in underserved communities. And we had over 30 people attend who gave us really helpful information about governance and what things should be. So we're going to use that information to have many more consultations throughout these underserved communities, again, to find out what kind of tangible ideas we can bring, hopefully to you, for you to think about. But we're not the only ones who are doing this kind of fact gathering and information gathering. There's many other people across the city who are doing it as well. So coming back to what you've had in front of you so far, this monumental, huge task for staff that I don't envy in a lot of ways, although it would be kind of fun if I got to, weigh it as well, which I get to do, I guess, through the work that I'm doing. But these are the things that I see that are missing. First of all, there's very few people who came out to the consultations, especially in Etobicoke and Scarborough. I wonder why there was a partnership with the University of Toronto rather than in Scarborough or at York University or in colleges throughout parts of the city that, not just are located geographically within underserved communities, but have people from underserved communities who are attending those institutions. I wonder about Indigenous people and the extent to which they were consulted at all. We know that the Aboriginal Affairs Committee hadn't met. I wonder about expert panels like took place in the governance review over 10 years ago. What kind of experts have been consulted in all of this? There's so many people who have things to help you with in your job, and I think let's reach out to them. So what do I think you should do? I think you should wait to make a decision, and you should use this committee as a forum to gather that input. I don't think you need to reinvent the wheel. There's lots of information out there on how to conduct good consultation processes, including here at the city. So do you want to really tackle this issue? I think you should, and I think you should do it now.
Thank you for speaking to us. Are there questions of the speaker? Councillor Carroll.
Yeah, the issue of the inclusiveness of who we've spoken to, but also expert panels. If we do this, staff have looked into it. Staff will probably report on it in their final recommendations. But throughout the Bill 5 sort of media debate that took place, there was no debate that we got to really take part in, but the media debated at length whether or not we should shrink last summer. And then in the consultations, that drove people to commenting on what they'd read in the paper. You'll be all right. They have these things called neighborhood councilors in LA, or neighborhood councils, and community boards in New York. People keep raising those because they kept coming up in the media, but we haven't researched them. What are their pitfalls? Is that a best practice? Could we make it even better? You're suggesting we should slow down and do that before we make recommendations?
Yeah, Toronto is not New York, it's not LA, it's not Winnipeg, it's Toronto. And whatever solution you're going to come up with for governance has to come from Toronto. So you can't just take an idea from New York or somewhere else and plant it in here and assume that it's going to work.
Plus, shouldn't we talk to them and say, are you deliriously happy with your wonderful community boards? Because I know that some councillors are not.
Absolutely. So part of the project that Professor Wood and I are engaging in is to go to cities across the world and ask about localized governance bodies like community boards or like an office of neighborhoods or what have you, and ask how that works. That's one of many questions that we're asking.
Right.
I think you need that information, and you need to, not just you need it, anybody who's going to weigh in on what kind of changes you're going to be asked to do also needs that information in order to give their opinions. So for example, when Professor Wood and I engage in our consultations, we have very direct questions that we're asking people, and we give them time to answer, and we use that as a building block for engaging in other conversations down the line. It's going too fast, what you're asked to do.
Yeah. And can I ask, you opened with it's been more than 10 years. So as a post-secondary institution, Is this work that you would be doing with or without Bill 5, simply because you would expect that any time now the city's going to start working on this? We would have been doing this work whether there were 47 councillors or 25 at some point. So was the post-secondary world already looking at this when Bill 5 came along?
Absolutely. I mean, a lot has changed in Toronto over the last 10 years, with or without Bill 5. And there was a need to look at your governance practices with or without Bill 5. This is the catalyst. This is, as geeks would call it, this is the policy window. This is when really good ideas get to come here for you to think about. But it's not like there were no issues before.
Right. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Are there any other questions? Because I've got one. Thanks for talking to us today. I was intrigued. You said that you had met with a group, or you were affiliated with somebody that met with a group, 30 people. They had some opinions on governance. What did they say?
So the first thing they said was they want something between City Council and them, that there needs to be some kind of body that they can bring their voices to. It used to be the local councillor. Some councillors are more or less receptive to being that interplay, but it was pretty much unanimous amongst the people that were there, and these are like local governance experts in their own way, right, that they wanted some kind of formal-ish body that existed between City Council and them.
So different than community council?
It could be probably different than the community councils as they're currently created, but it doesn't have to be community council, something else. In addition, they were very interested in the topic. This was not a boring, hey, I'm just coming for the free coffee kind of thing. This was of great interest. They spoke about equity, they spoke about safety, and they spoke about wanting to make a difference. So, for example, we had a number of post-secondary students who were there whose parents, who are newcomers to Toronto, don't speak English as well as they do. And so they spoke about their role as the informants for their local communities. And so, to us, what that raised is how much information is really getting to are we using the right ways of getting information out there? So they spoke about things like that.
Were they a random composition of the community, or how were they brought together as a group?
So this is the other thing that many of the other speakers have already spoken about. It takes time to develop trust because, people are oversaturated with consultation requests as well, right? And especially people from underserved communities. And so for them to think that this was something meaningful for them to put their energy and time into, they had to believe that we were going to listen to them. So we have an advisory board, Professor Wood and I, with many of the same sorts of people who are doing work in this area as well. And we use them to reach out with their contacts and networks. We used our contacts and networks to find people who are doing community work in their neighborhoods. And we told them what we were doing, we told them why, and we developed some trust, basically, that we were actually going to listen to what they had to say and communicate it in some way. So that's how we got them out.
The report that we see before us is kind of a preview of what I think will come in the final report, right? We're getting a peek at what the feedback has been. And that will find its way into a sharper report that we can use to make decisions here. Will you or your group provide input as well? So I don't know if we will have continued consultation, right? It's not contemplated so far, and there's been a few speakers talking about it, but let's say this is the window, and when that report is written, it's written. Will you be making a submission? Because you've met with a group of 30 people, you've got some thoughts on governance.
So I don't
find its way.
So I don't think 30 people is enough. So I wouldn't feel comfortable writing a report now to this one consultation with 30 people saying that this is the end of the story for what we have to contribute. Later this week, we're going to be having an engagement with Indigenous community members. We're going to be having many more consultations over the course of the month, next month. I don't know how much information we'll have for you by the time your final report comes that we're going to be able to convey that will give credit to what these folks are helping us work on. So yes, of course, Professor Wood and I have already come to this meeting several times, this committee several times. We've given information to you several times, and we care, and we want to help you have the information that you need. But we're not going to have as much information as you could benefit from in November.
Okay, yeah, so you've been connected in the process. You've been making
Yes.
submissions. Okay, great. No, so we've got something from you. You're an academic. You've got expertise in this. So you've made submissions through the process. As I don't recall you speaking, but it's found its way
Yeah.
in different ways.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate it. Any other questions? Nope. Thanks for joining us. Our next speaker is Felicia Davis. Welcome to the committee, Felicia. You've got 5 minutes.
Good morning. My name is Felicia Davis, and I'm a resident of Ward 24, and I'm also the project coordinator for the Democratic Engagement Exchange at Ryerson University. First off, I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today, and I'm here to speak about the importance of the Special Committee on Governance and why I believe its mandate should be extended. In the 2018 municipal elections, only 41% of Torontonians casted their ballots. The reduction in city council, the lack of information regarding the ward changes, especially without the consultation of community voices, has definitely created a hole in our democracy. Being a resident leader myself, and now having the privilege in my role to create spaces to residents to be engaged, to understand what issues matter to them, and I have a deep understanding of the importance of resident voices in the democratic process and why it matters. And from my experience, residents need to feel connected to their city, not isolated. And there are residents that I have connected with from across the city who deeply care about the city and want to make it more inclusive, equitable, and just work better, especially on decisions that will impact their communities. The Special Committee on Governance is the space to have those voices and concerns heard. My work currently with the Democratic Engagement Exchange involves a project called Democracy Talks TO. This project focuses on increasing civic and democratic engagement on a broader scale that is inclusive to a wider range of residents. It builds pathways for residents interested in playing a leadership role in their communities. But most importantly, it's to make civic and democratic engagement meaningful for residents on issues that matter to them. With the reduction of City Council, the Special Committee on Governance plays an ever more crucial role within our democracy, and the ways that the city engages with grassroots resident groups, community organizations, neighborhood associations, and how to be involved in local and citywide decision-making processes. Resident groups have had very little time to contribute to the Special Committee on Governance consultations, and there needs to be a greater effort by the city to make the public consultations more inclusive and accessible. In conclusion, I would strongly recommend that the Special Committee on Governance be extended because to do really good city building work takes time, to facilitate these conversations, to listen to these conversations, and for residents to understand the Special Committee on Governance cannot be accomplished in a short amount of time. The extension of this committee is an opportunity to build on the work that is currently taking place, to build better relationships with community members, resident leaders, and neighborhood associations as we grow and move forward as a city. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions of the speaker? Councillor Carroll.
Yeah, so I had to look at the map because we're still getting used to each other's boundaries. So I had to look at Ward 24, which is roughly the size of France. It goes from the waterfront to the 401. It's insane. So there was a consultation in Scarborough, but from the sounds of your deputation, you don't have any faith that Scarborough Guildwood residents either knew it was on or felt welcome enough to go to it.
Right, and being a Scarborough resident myself, who is engaged, but in terms of just the demographics of Scarborough and how neighborhoods work in that big area of the city, definitely residents are not given enough information or even enough time to sort of plan out to attend consultations like this.
Okay, and In the report today, it does talk about there being one more step, which will be before the November report. They'll be going out to speak to neighborhood associations. In a ward the size of Scarborough-Guildwood, is there a neighborhood association for every neighborhood?
No, there's not. What actually is a supplement of that is are called neighborhood improvement area planning tables and resident groups that are extension of those NIA planning tables.
Right, but those are only in NIA designated areas.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I wonder if you would like to comment on previous deputants. We heard that another step that we could do is to actually be going out there to canvass for appointments or opinions instead of saying, here's a hall, come to it, actually get out on the ground and get some opinions that way. Or go out with actual tangible proposals that people could bounce off of. If we went out there with tangible proposals, in a ward like Ward 24, we would still have to do some unconventional types of outreach to get people to come to that meeting, would we not?
Yes, you would, yeah. So, for example, in terms of unconventional outreach, it would mean having to actually go into different spaces, really.
Yeah.
Spaces that you know where people gather. It could be parent groups, it could be food security groups, it could be even at local food banks.
Right.
Yeah. So those are the unconventional ways to engage people besides just having them come to, let's say, a town hall at a specific time. And then, yeah, so that's what I would suggest.
Okay, and in the meantime, you'd like to hear that we've done a little more research on what the models are in other governments where they have these large areas of representation.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions? Thank you for joining us. Our next speaker is Max Allen. Welcome back, Max. You've got 5 minutes.
Good morning again. I'm here on behalf of the Grange Community Association, and I want to say that I think this session is terrific. I've spent a lot of time in this room, and this is a dandy way to spend time. At about the same time last year that the special committee was formed, we, the Grange Community Association, convened some meetings with 7 downtown residents associations to discuss the issue of how best to live with a reduced council, your issue. One of the things we came up with is similar to an Office of Neighborhoods. We thought one model could be the 4-person support system in City Hall for BIAs. We thought that a similar institution within City Hall for residents associations might be a good idea. Another model for this would be the now dead Provincial Support Center associated with the LPAT. Another model would be the parliamentary and congressional research bodies in Washington and Ottawa. Our aim was a research and advisory service that was easy, cheap, and effective, that could serve both councillors and citizens through residents' associations. We commend this idea to you as you go forward. We applaud the work of this committee and especially the work of the staff and the consultants who are supporting you. And after having heard the previous material, I want to suggest to you 4 word, that's F-O-U-R word slogans. The first one is deputing is not working. The second one is less voting, more sortition. The third one is we had neighborhood councils. And the fourth one is tangible proposals are good. We could make T-shirts with those slogans on them. Keep at it.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Carroll.
The Office of Neighborhoods, and very much present company accepted, it's not anyone here, but there is a body of councillors who will say, I'm the Office of Neighborhoods. You want to talk to a neighborhood in ward whatever, that's me. I'm in every neighborhood. That's what I'm here for. How do we respond to them, to the idea of needing an office that checks on the engagement that is not political? How do we counter their opinion?
How do I reply to a counselor saying, I am the neighborhood? No, you're not.
That's only 3 words. Thank you.
The "your" is contracted, so, look, no counselor can know everything. I spend a lot of time at the LPAT and in other places where development proposals are discussed, and neither staff planners nor the developers live around the building and know it, the proposed building, and know it every day. I know what the traffic is like. I know how people walk the streets. I know things that local people know and that experts don't. And that kind of knowledge is a very valuable resource for counselors. When I'm suggesting an office of neighborhoods, I'm suggesting 4 people, which is how many the BIA office has now, who would serve as a research and advice organization, but would be a way to focus local knowledge through a body and to other people, and those other people would often be counselors. You know, the congressional, the parliamentary research office in Ottawa works on behalf of MPs. And this office that I'm talking about would work on behalf of both residents' associations and people like you who need to know things. My experience with Councillor Cressy's office and now with Councillor Layton's office is that no matter how terrific the people in that office are, they don't know everything. And they don't have the resources to find out some things that would be helpful for them to know. And such a new body, cheap, efficient, easy, within City Hall would serve that function. Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions of the speaker? Seeing none?
Nobody asked me what sortition was.
I looked it up.
Well, it's the future, that's what it is, and it will solve a lot of problems, I think.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Derek Moran. Welcome back, Derek. You have 5 minutes.
In this report, it mentions the term governance and issues related to municipal governance are complex. Well, yes and no. I remember being asked a question once by Councillor Carroll at the police board, and I forget the exact context, but what I do remember, part of what she said to me was, the City of Toronto Act gives us the authority to do that. Mayor Tory is always happy to remind people that the City of Toronto Act is a creature of statute created by the province. But where did the province get their authority to create municipalities? Well, British North America Act, 1867, known as the BNA, exclusive powers of provincial legislatures, Section 92. In each province, the legislature may exclusively make laws in relation to matters coming within the classes of subjects next hereinafter enumerated. Subsection 8, municipal institutions in the province. Hogan versus Newfoundland Attorney General, 1998, Supreme Court of Newfoundland and Labrador said, It is a constitutional requirement that every enactment, whether federal or provincial, receive royal assent as part of the legislative process. No bill becomes law until assented to by the sovereign. It is the act of the sovereign through the Governor General or Lieutenant Governor that breathes life into the law. Royal assent is required in every case. So this is an affidavit that I had done up. City of Toronto lawyer Fred Fisher has a copy of it. That's paragraph 69. While explaining to Rob Rossini that the City of Toronto is actually a municipal institution as mentioned in the British North America Act, he interrupted me and said, "Not anymore, that all changed." When I asked him what he meant by that, he said, "That all changed with the Confederation Act of 1987, the one that Brian Mulroney did." When I asked him if he meant the UK-Canada Act 1982, he said, "Oh yeah, that one. That's all changed since then." Paragraph 71. The word municipal isn't even mentioned once in the UK-Canada Act 1982, Constitution Act 1982. In the Federal Interpretation Act in section 4.1, it says, "The enacting clause of an act may be in the following form. Her Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the Senate and House of Commons of Canada, enacts as follows." 4.2, "The enacting clause of an act shall follow the preamble, if any, and the various provisions within the purview or body of the act shall follow in a concise and enunciated form." Now here's where the problem is. The resolution to amend the Constitution 1981, the Supreme Court of Canada said, "The Statute Law Revision Act 1893 repealed some obsolete provisions of the North America Act of 1867. And in paragraph 73 of my affidavit, Queen Victoria repealed the enacting clause of the British North America Act 1867 with the Statute Law Revision Act 1893, as pointed out here by Maurice Olivier in his book, British North America Acts and Selected Statutes. I have it on the back here. It's rather long, but at the very bottom there, the highlighted portion is the footnotes where he mentioned the repealing of the enacting clause of the British North America Act. So here is a question for a brave city council member to ask of Wendy Wahlberg at the next council meeting next week. If Queen Victoria repealed the enacting clause of the BNA, because remember, that's where the province gets the authority to create municipalities, with the Statute Law Revision Act in 1893, then in order for it to come into force again, would Queen Elizabeth first have to reenact the BNA, the British North America Act, 1867? And there's also talk in this report about the City of Toronto should get its own charter. Well, actually, the City of Toronto actually already has their own charter. It's called the Charter of Expectations and Values. I mentioned this actually a couple years ago at the police board. What I also mentioned at the police board to Chair Andy Pringle was how I gave them 3 different versions of this Charter of Expectations and Values, and how over each version, the City of Toronto was deleting and removing various language in it, to the point where you can't even find the City of Toronto's charter on the internet because apparently the City of Toronto's deleted it. So, I mean, it's like the City of Toronto has become so corrupt under Meritorious Watch that you guys actually deleted your own charter. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions of the deputy? Seeing none, I'll move to the next one. I have Sue Dexter. Sue? Hi again, Sue.
I had a presentation, and I'm not so sure you need to endure it, but let's talk about what the context is for your work in the city. We're a city of good intentions, and I think deteriorating results. And I say it with regret, because nobody wants the city to do better than I do. Many ideas we work for, programs we embrace, are either frozen before consideration or passed into bylaws and never enforced because there is no funding, because there may not be staff. Think heritage. Think the issues on forestry we've given you to. Think of safety. We can't even keep the speed limits observed. We had a discussion in the car this morning. I said, there's another dead, and Beata, who was with me, said, oh yeah, it's in Etobicoke. I said, no, it wasn't. It was in Scarborough again. And she said, no, it's Etobicoke. Well, it was a murder in Etobicoke, and a pedestrian was killed in Scarborough. And we have to do stuff. That's the social contract. We have to make the city safe. When promises are made and not kept, if the bargain is broken, it's hard to keep the faith. The mayor announced Friday he will participate in a climate change emergency initiative. Twitter erupted in fears that it is a hollow promise. That's a very bad sign. That's a very bad sign. We're told there are staff shortages, and that was before the province cut funding on programs we rely on and that we will now have to pay for if they're to be maintained. Policies are not adequate to protect those in the greatest need. We try to get affordable housing into approvals, and even if we do on the Honest Eds project, it's stymied for lack of funding. What is passed is minuscule in relation to the need. The city's policy for rental replacement in the face of development doesn't compensate those evicted, forcing them to leave their communities unless they're rich enough to pay extra to stay. We're a divided city. You've heard all through today a theme of a divided city, and it seems there are no policies or will to bring us together. Sometimes it seems our political class exploits what divides us. We need to put in place some system where where the city can pull together, where the communities can pull together. You heard a lot of stuff today about minority communities. How do you reach them? We need to reach them. We need to reach beyond our borders, our local borders, and you can create institutionally systems where that happens, and where the ideas that are generated by the contact can bubble up into your processes. If you had we were just talking about the problems, the work that's being done by staff is a miracle, but it's kind of siloed. It's kind of, now we're going to look with these guys, now we'll look with those guys, now we'll look with those guys, and then the academic guys come in and say, can we borrow your ideas? And the ideas from the academics have been great. We need to somehow take what's generated, put the funds to it again, and give the staff the resources they would need, and to come together in collectively, here's what we've found. Let's all sit down and talk about it, because you can't do it piecemeal, I don't think, and to realize something. So what we're saying is that whatever is put forward by this committee should improve consultation, understanding, trust, and include a realistic assessment of whether we can deliver on what we promise. Proposals could be road tested against questions such as these. And it's interesting, I don't know these guys. You're going to hear the same stuff here that you're hearing from them. Is there a way to improve funding? Is there a way to build the community into the budget process earlier so we can shape the city together? Would your proposal address the divided...
So it's with a lot of trepidation that I ask if you could wind up.
Oh, you don't dare. I've got 4 more. And Max was short.
I was short.
Ask,
my 2 minutes.
would you... Well, you'll indulge me again. So would your proposal address the divided city? We have to sort that. It's a very big issue. We're rich, poor, we're Scarborough, not. We're downtown, all of that has to get sorted. Would it address inequities? Does your proposal improve the ability of the city to carry out its own policies? Does the change strengthen the voice and participation of citizens? so their creativity is not stifled and they feel as though they have a real stake in their city. Does the city have the power to fulfill its mandate? That's it. Over.
Are there any questions of the deputant? Oh, I see Councillor Carroll.
Yeah, I heard you, when you were talking about, do you need to reach out more? Do you need to get across different types of communities? You also said we need to reach beyond our, did you mean citizens? You need to
Everybody.
reach beyond your
Everybody.
boundaries to beyond your local neighborhood.
My brothers and
that
sisters.
you represent. Yeah.
So the 17-year-old kid is killed in Scarborough, and I feel it because I've had deaths within 2 blocks of my house. I've had 7 deaths. Cars, pedestrians,
Yeah.
1 bicycle. So we should. And I don't know. I mean, it's interesting. Max has ideas. We really haven't come up with a magic idea of what could encompass this assembly of communities, maybe, where you could throw us all together. Community councils are defined by communities of interest, pretty much. We're like these guys, so we should be in this council, and we're not like those guys. I think there should be some sort of assembly, maybe, of communities, and it needn't even be legislative, but to run stuff through them to say, are we really looking after everybody?
Well, it's interesting because I don't know if you noticed in the report, one of the pieces of feedback that was highlighted, so I guess things that are highlighted in the report, I'm assuming it's because they came up more than once. There's one in here that says the mayor should present citywide strategic priorities at the beginning of a term. One would assume that if he did that, that would draw a sort of all neighborhoods assembly. If it's going to be sort of loosely defined, not, this rigid thing, could you not build it out of that? If we did follow that step that's been recommended, you would then have a neighborhood assembly that through just data banking them, you could go back to them at the times when council was grappling with something big for the rest of the term.
That's right, but what you need is consultation. When you talked about working groups, the earlier you get into the process with a discussion, the more likely you have a consensus coming out the other end.
Right.
So if the mayor were to I don't think there's any institutional consultation process for a mayor's agenda, for example. But you could democratize the whole thing and say, okay, we're going to have a citizens' assembly leading to what are we going to do? And then you'd have to look at how you would fund things, how you'd put the budget in. You get cynicism now because all the aspirations are in the legislation you're already passing. We're all agreed on what you're doing.
Right.
The problem is it's not implemented because it can't be paid for, and certainly
Right.
Councillor Crawford knows about that.
Okay.
But I think involve us.
Right.
Consensus, consultation, get us in there.
Okay, thank you.
And we'll see you all whatever day that is.
Thank you,
think
Councillor. Any
Tuesday.
other questions? Thank you for joining us.
Thanks.
Miguel Avila Velarde. Welcome, Miguel.
Thank you.
You have 5 minutes.
So I'm celebrating 10 years coming to City Hall as a regular deputant, not as a presenter, correcting what Derek Moran said today. I'm a deputant for the last 10 years. Ever since I lost my job with the Toronto Zoo, I came to the budget committee led by Councillor Carroll. At the time, she was the budget chief at the time. Ever since I haven't stopped coming. I'm talking on the item related to the details on public engagement activities, GB 4.21. I want to speak on regarding page 5 of the survey, 3.3 is on page 8 at the bottom, City Council. Why I'm speaking on this matter? Because, as you probably are aware, on December the 5th of 2018, new enhancement security process were approved by City Council. Like I say, I've been coming to City Council since the days of Debbie Miller, since the days of Rafford, and since Debbie Miller, John Tory was elected first time and second time around, all because some fears of bombs, scare, or etc. You're trying to minimize the participation of people at City Council, and in this on these activities, there is nothing that deals with accessibility. And I wonder why there's nothing that talks about accessibility to City Council. I wonder if this committee can recommend that some of these recommendations can go back to the Disability Advisory Committee, which they meet on Thursday, tomorrow, about accessibility. They have asked me time and time again when I go to the washroom that I had to get screened in and out. This is a situation that is unbearable for someone who has a disability. I had diabetes. When I go to council on City Council days at the third floor City Council, they ask me, Miguel, you need to get a card. We're gonna give you a card, that's what they told me. So you can have access to the washrooms. How embarrassing, how ridiculous this is, to suggest someone with a disability. And I mentioned to this at the last executive committee, Councilor Crawford, you were there in attendance, and Mayor Tory says he's gonna do something about it. So please, stop diminishing the participation of public by lifting some of the barriers that you have created as a result of the security enhancement at City Council. It is embarrassing that someone who has a disability has to be screened up to 3 times by security, corporate security, going through metal detector, in and out. Like, who else gets this kind of treatment? I wonder if you, Councilor Stephen Holiday, would like to go and use the washroom on the third council floor and being asked by security, hey, empty your pockets. We want to search you because we are afraid that someone who went to the washroom has, I don't know, created a bomb out of the water. It's embarrassing, trust me. So I'm here to speak on the recommendations by the public about remote connectivity, participation. You see, we have a problem at the Toronto Police Services Board, and Derek Moran can attribute to that. We are being screened to go into the police headquarters. We had to go through a metal detector. We had to empty our pockets, and it's embarrassing that we who have contributed with ideas and suggestions to improve our city, like myself, after being unfairly fired from the Toronto Zoo, I've come here because I only one goal is that we stop creating problems, barriers, and inequities, and abuse of discrimination to people who comes to City Council. I suggested also, I want to show here. Why we don't have a staff dedicated on that table so that when us, members of the public, want to ask the city clerk, hey, I want to talk on this item. It is intimidating when, example, city executive, you had officers stationed in that corner right there. How can you go through them and say, I want to talk to the clerk because I want to speak on this item? Would it be beneficial for us just to have someone on that table and send a note, I want to speak on this matter, instead of being intimidated by a corporate security guard? And so those are the things I want to bring to your attention. And please, stop this nonsense. This is ridiculous. You have to stop this barrier for someone who has come to City Council for the last 10 years. I should be grandfathered to use the third floor washrooms for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Miguel. Are there any questions of Miguel? Can I ask one very simple one?
Yeah.
I know you're here often, and you've got
10 years.
Yeah, absolutely, and you've got good observations about process and system around that. this is one forum to raise them. Have you ever written letters about suggestions like that, about how to reach the city clerk better or work through security? Because, you know, I take the point, you know, you want to make sure you get the clerk's attention, they're across the floor. Have you got a solution for that? And have you put it in a note to somebody? And I don't know who that person is. It might be John Elvidge, it might be head of security.
Well, as I said, I spoke on this matter last executive committee, but I'm willing to put it on a note for corporate security and the city clerk to ensure that we have some modifications to the system.
Fair enough. And, you know, I encourage you to do that and, you know, and even copy it to the committee chair.
Oh, yeah.
Because I'm thinking about the meeting room and how it works and you raise it to the right chair.
And remote access, Skype, we got technologies available. If people are unable to come to City Hall because, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, thank you for speaking to us. So that was our last speaker on the list. Is there anyone that has not registered and wishes to speak? And I'll do one final call for Ali Abdurrahman. We missed Ali earlier. Ali does not appear to be here. With that, I will ask committee members if there are questions of staff on the report. Councillor Carroll.
Okay, hang on a sec. Let me move to my fancy document. I have an Apple Pencil now, so I always have lots of questions. In the report, I've talked to staff about this offline already. We talk about the fact that in our very first meeting, some of the deputants who we invited to tell us what we should be looking at raised election issues. Everything from having, going forward in the large wards, too small a fundraising period for non-incumbents, to rank balloting, and rank balloting a lot. We heard a lot about that. I don't see in the report, if we're going out to consult again with neighborhood associations, that we're going to raise that as a question at all. How will we find out if they raise it? Will that be reported back to us, even if it wasn't one of the questions we might ask neighborhood associations?
Thank you, Councillor, for the question. To the chair, I would just like to confirm that the engagement's not complete. We still have sessions, once we held last night, and other sessions this week and following Tuesday with neighborhood associations as directed by this committee to do additional research.
With the which associations?
Neighborhood associations. And so there's a series of drop-ins this week, and then there's an online survey, so 3 surveys currently out there. And in addition, that there's a workshop next Tuesday evening as well. So we've invited them to come and speak with us about their views on the issues before this committee as well. And I understand that there are comments that are coming in still on issues including election reform amongst them. So we'll be reporting on all of the consultations that we're doing and all the research that we're undertaking, looking at other jurisdictions and so on in our report to this committee.
Okay, and the neighborhood associations that you're meeting with now, how are they sourced? How are they chosen?
So they're not chosen. We had a number of lists. Clerks maintains a list of residents and ratepayers associations that they use to communicate to our associations. We promoted them through our community development officers, our CDOs, our BIAs, the partnerships offices that we have, and reached out. Almost 1,000, I think, emails went out to groups and organizations inviting them to participate in these sessions and this online survey with them as well.
Do councillors get that list? Well, I haven't seen it, but maybe my staff are seeing it. Do we get the clerk's list of associations? If a new one emerges, how does it make its way to the clerk's list? What does it have to do to get there?
Mr. Chair, the list that we maintain is for the purposes of the Planning Act, so it's residents associations who have requested to be informed of matters under their statutory right under the Planning Act. So it doesn't purport to be, it's not a community engagement list. It's a formal list of parties to Planning Act matters.
So if a new neighborhood association was formed, and it was in an area where there isn't a lot of development, there are still a few of those, but if it was in an area where there wasn't a lot of development, they just got together because for Vision Zero reasons or whatever, could they be put on that list, or would they have to be there as a result of the legislative process around notices for development?
Again, I don't want to, even though it sounds like we're maintaining an exhaustive list and tracking that, that's actually not the function.
No, what I hear you saying is you're keeping a list that's really kind of single issue, because you have to, you get generated by being at the heart of a growth area. That's what it sounds like. So, like, how do you get on, if we want, because it seems like they're making it onto that list for a singular purpose, but they're now being used for another purpose as access. So how do you put a group on that list so that they would be accessed at a time like this?
Well, I defer to my colleagues here, but I think what we're talking about is a gap in, the tracking and maintaining of lists for community engagement purposes.
Yeah.
Or mapping, or maybe it's done by other parties. I'll defer to, 211 or other parties maintain those lists. But just to be clear, the only thing, we don't advertise being in the business of maintaining the definitive ratepayers list. We have a statutory duty under the Planning Act to provide notice to resident ratepayer associations who ask to be put on that list so that they can be parties at the board of the LPAT.
Yeah.
And that's the list we maintain. We're not claiming that it's something more than that.
Right.
And maybe I could just also add to that we also, in holding these kinds of consultations, we also develop a subscription list so anyone could subscribe to get updates and information as well. It's very hard to maintain these lists. As you've noted, they pop up and then they disappear as well. There's several online websites of groups trying to gather that information, and they go out of date very, very quickly.
Yes.
Associations are created. A few of them are incorporated, and many of them are kind of single issue as well. So we get lots of bounce backs, and so we try to cross-post as much as possible.
Okay. I mentioned it to a deputant. It's at the bottom of page 10 or page 7, I should say, under strategic decision-making. For example, some focused on the role of the mayor as chief executive of the city and proposed that the mayor should actively communicate the strategic priorities of the city at the beginning of the term. I'm putting you on the spot here, but that sounds a lot like what we heard leading up to this election. It's hard to remember those times because Bill 5 was this all-consuming question, and so we sort of stopped talking about it. For months leading up to the election, we had the youth in the city and various organizations saying that they wanted a thing like that to happen, but they weren't talking about strategic priorities. They were talking about the budget. They were saying they wanted beginning of the term listening to Toronto again, like many moons ago. Do you recall the input that came as a result of this process? Were the words strategic priorities used, or did they say budget priorities? Because that was a lot of places that came up again and again and again with youth in the early part of 18 and the fall of 17.
Last question.
Thank you, Councillor. Through the chair, actually, they did talk about strategic decision-making, and in what we heard was that there's this tension that councillors have larger wards, and are they able, in fact, to pay attention to both the constituents' needs and these larger citywide and governance needs as well? And they particularly thought that the way in which to manage that is to manage the councillor's time and also the information flow. So it wasn't necessarily about the budget as it was about this need to look citywide and ward-wide.
So I'm sorry, I know you said that was my last question, but I'm focused on the input where the community said at the beginning of the term. So I'm not talking about councillors in general. I'm talking about at the beginning of the term, there seemed to be input that the mayor or the chief executive, as chief executive of the city, should actively communicate the strategic priorities of the city at the beginning of the term. So I'm wondering if you remember, was that strategic priorities? Did they talk about financial? Because it's very similar to that input and yet not exact. Is that because you're sort of generalizing a range of input?
Well, I
At
understand the
beginning
question,
of the term
and
piece is my focus.
I think it had, if I remember correctly through the data, it had a lot to do with if somehow those were set at the beginning, it would send a guiding post for the rest of council to be able to follow some broad citywide strategies and deal with their warrant issues. But
Right.
they didn't specifically talk to the budget, Councillor, and there were many other suggestions about how the city could be more strategic. This was just one
Right.
kind of theme we heard about at the beginning of the term.
Yeah, that's just the one I was asking about. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Are there other questions from the committee? I will take a moment just to ask a couple of simple ones. The report talks about people that came to the open sessions. I think it was 47. Is that 47 unique individuals or 47 attendees? Because the ones I was at, I did note there were some people that attended more than one.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, at each of the meetings, we had one or two people who came. We had one or two people who came to every single one of the meetings, and then we had one or two people who came to one or two of the meetings. So there was some multiple attendance of participants.
Included in the number of 47?
That's correct.
Okay. And then I think you noted as well that the emails, I think it was 88 out of 101 focused on a singular issue. What was the distribution of the balance of issues? Were they all very unique in nature, or were they also clustered on particular ideas?
When it came to the emails, the rest of them were often addressing the issue of the role the residents' associations played in the city's decision-making process. And then additionally to that, comment on, just to my colleague here.
And we don't have to go through all of them, but just if there was significant clustering of that, I'd be interested in knowing, or if they were generally distributed, was the balance?
So generally distributed, and I think as with across all of the engagements, the issue of public engagement was, I guess, the second most mentioned issue.
So the committee's been underway for almost a year, I guess about 11 months. Can you tell us, out of those 11 months, how the city in general has been open to receive information into this process? I am worried, we are coming down towards the end and there's maybe a lot coming in, but how long have we been open for suggestions on governance at large? And maybe the first window was the very first meeting.
So in addition, of course, to speakers at the special committee meetings, we established a purpose-built website for the committee and the committee's work. We prepared background information, a workbook, a guide for community organizations to be able to run their own discussions as well. We put the information online in 10 languages to support that engagement. We held 5 public sessions at different times of the week and in the evenings and on a weekend. As I noted earlier, there are 3 online surveys live, one for individuals to participate in, one for residents, associations, and groups, and then also for council members to provide their input as well. We've received written and email submissions. We are now, as I mentioned, launching a series of discussions with neighborhood associations this week. Last night we had a first meeting and 16 one-on-one interviews were held. We've met with key informants, including Professors Wood and Flynn, to talk about their research and the work that they're doing. I believe our staff have taken phone calls and met with people as they wish throughout the process.
I just wanted to focus on the next step section. In the background, you've talked about applying the 3 lenses or categories of communication engagement, representation, committee and agenda management, and for the most part, the comments and feedback have fit into those broad themes. With the next steps, can you help us understand as a committee what we might see in your report? Obviously, we've got a lot of feedback. Some of that feedback are things that this committee nor even council can change. It talks about it in the report. It's maybe other orders of government. And maybe there are things that could be considered for change. And the last I'll always raise, and I talked about it before, were just conventions or patterns or things that we do here that were raised by citizens as something to think about. And the simple example I'll use was the interest of the committee on members' motions, but I thought I made the point in there that it's by convention that council has allowed these items to enter the floor. And how will you treat those in a report? How will you say to council, you might want to think about your convention?
Thank you. I try to tackle a few of those, sorry. I do
There's
my
only a
best.
couple for the day.
All right, first. The first question.
Yours was longer.
I didn't keep going. The first question relates, I think, to some of what we've heard here as well, is that we've been also undertaking interjurisdictional research and talking to many of the cities that have been mentioned here and in previous committee meetings. So we'll be bringing back some of the findings there about how those may or may not fit into the city's governance models or aspirations. We have looked at the direction from this committee to look at what's within our jurisdiction and what's most broken, for example. And we've layered on a kind of another one, which is to do no harm. So I may use as an example the issue of presentations and speakers is finding a model that works well without creating additional barriers to participation. So if we recommend a tweak to that part of the governance model, we wouldn't want it to create any additional challenges for people. We look at other cities, for example, and the way in which they select those who present at a committee can be more restrictive than the ones we have. So we're looking again at those best practices. We are going to triage, so to speak, all the input that we receive, and again, I just caution that we haven't completed receiving all the information, and try to understand more what kinds of suggestions that have come forward that we can in fact implement immediately. So improvements to our engagement processes, better publication of 311 and 211 and those sources of information, are ways perhaps we don't need council direction to do, but things that staff in fact can undertake. We would look at recommendations that do require council's consideration and authority to change. Those may be amendments to the mandates of a committee, for example, or the ways in which we process public information. Additionally, there are a range of comments that we've received and feedback that may fall outside of the jurisdiction of the City of Toronto, requires either federal or provincial legislation that may not fall within the mandate of this committee or within council. I would also say that we've looked at what the other committees are of council who address these issues as well, and of course the executive committee has the mandate to look at governance issues too, and what would be properly before that committee we would be recommending. So we anticipate to be triaging all of that, plus the work that we've done on other research and putting forward recommendations to this committee in that regard.
Thank you. Just a time check, we've got 6 minutes. I'll take a motion to finish the item. Councillor Perks, all in favor? Any opposed? I think we'll be fairly quick. Any other questions? Members wishing to speak? Councillor Perks.
So I have a motion that the Special Committee on Governance direct the city manager to report to the November 1st, 2019 meeting with proposals for improving the city's governance model and a plan to consult the public on those proposals and the financial impacts of this additional work. I want to be clear what I mean by that. So we just had a version of a work plan based on completing the work by November with the existing resources that we have and triaging this and doing that. And what we've heard today from deputants is a call for a very different approach. Frankly, to my mind, the best consultation is the one that gives you an answer that's a surprise. And the surprise here is that the public wants a little clearer picture of the kinds of things we would consider doing. They want us to reach outside the regular channels that we, go to for information, and they want more in terms of the research that staff have begun to do about how it does work in New York, or what they do think about ranked ballots here or there. So the conversation can be more focused. And I think that's fantastic. Now, in thinking about where to go from here, I went and talked to staff, and staff said, well, Councillor, if you want that, it's going to cost some money. And that's a fair point. So I would like to know in November, just ballpark, okay, what is it actually going to cost to have a focused and productive conversation with Torontonians about how to make changes to how we govern the City of Toronto so that we do a better job of it? I think that's a completely fair thing to ask, and I look forward to seeing that. What I don't want to see, and I want to be very explicit about this, is something saying, well, we think that, there's all these questions like, say, ranked ballots, or having a second tier of government, or reforming how election campaigns that are financed are too hard for us to give you advice on at this point. That, if that's what the report comes back and says, then we are just right back at where we were a year ago, or when this committee was first established. We will have achieved nothing. I know that we're asking staff to go out a bit on a limb, but I need them to give me advice, and I want to stress it's preliminary advice for consultation purposes. I want to give me advice saying, if you do want to reform finances, here are 3 ways that it's done in other places, and a sentence on what we think the consequences of doing it that way might be. That would be of value to me, of value to the community, and would give us something to talk about and get results from. So I just want to make it real clear that's what I'm looking for, and the reason I'm looking for it is because that's what I heard today, and that's what I've also heard from community organizations in the ward I represent who couldn't be here today. Thank you.
May I, if there's no one else, I'd like to question the mover, but I'll turn it to my colleagues first.
Yeah.
So thank you, Councillor Perks. Just to help me understand the intent of this motion, how is it different than what we would anticipate that staff are going to bring? So it directs the city manager to come to a meeting, next meeting, with proposals on improving the city governance. I thought I heard that that's what we're going to expect. And I would presume that there would be some measure of impact on that, but I'm just trying to understand the utility of this motion.
So a couple of things. First of all, what staff have proposed is that they will bring us a report in November that says, here are some things that you can easily implement. Here are some things that are really difficult, and you should approve the things that are easy to implement. We'll do our own thinking at some later date yet to be defined on what to do about the more difficult things. I don't find that to be adequate. So what I'm saying is, no, give us a proposal, give us a series of proposals, whether the thing is easy to implement, difficult to implement, complex, or simple. Just say what your initial advice on those things is, and tell us how you would imagine going and getting public advice on all those different things, not just the easy to implement stuff, okay? And then, what's it going to cost to do that? That's very different than what the staff have proposed.
You have to forgive me, can you give me an example of an item that would be difficult to implement that you would think that staff are going to not articulate or elaborate in their report versus what you would expect them
So
to?
my reading of the report we have today is that something like campaign finance reform, from what the staff plan says, my sort of reading behind, beneath the surface is, they're going to come back and say, that's a very complicated problem and the city should think about it someday. What I'm saying is, don't bring us that. Say, here are 3 different ways that we have found for reforming municipal election campaign finance reform. In our humble opinion, we think this one's better than the other 2, but we're not absolutely sure. Why don't you go ask some experts and the public, and that's going to cost some money, and this is how much money that will cost.
So public consultation aside, do you believe that there's enough time between now and November 1st for the staff to go to that level of resolution on the pieces that have come out in the report? Understanding that for the example that you raised, there's a question raised about campaign finances. It seems to me that you're asking the staff to propose what the solution is and then, of course, articulate the costs.
To give a proposed solution for the purposes of further consultation. There's a very important distinction between giving us advice that we take to council for final resolution and giving us sort of, quick and dirty, we think this one works better than that one, and here's our initial thinking. It's a different standard of advice, which is a much lower bar, which I think gives staff the ability to not have to do as much work on each of the items as they would have to if the standard was, take it to council, this is fully baked.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other speakers on the item? Councillor Carroll.
So I think the motion, I don't have a motion. The motion that Councillor Perks is moving is really one of foresight, because quite apart from the things that I mean, he raised campaign finance reform. You may think that's not our role right this minute, but even within the more obvious types of governance issues, we've already heard that staff are already communicating with neighborhood and community associations. They're already doing a little bit of extra work. But each place they've gone, whether it's the survey, the town hall mode, or this more refined mode that they're in the middle of doing right now, what keeps coming back is the problem that was already there before, is that people are feeling more and more detached from council, and they're asking, how are you going to interact with us more on the ground? So they're going to make recommendations on that. If we just leave it without this motion, recommendations will be made. I think Councillor Perks's motion just shows foresight and recognizes that if they come back with proposals, they will not be without controversy. The community will not be without an opinion on whatever those proposals are. And if we don't go out and get their opinion, we're just demonstrating how very detached they are. If we simply get a report in November and say, great, you might get some emails about this in your council, in your councillor offices, make a deputation about it, this is on its way to executive and then on its way to council. And that's that. If we do it that way, we've really just modeled the very thing people keep saying is a problem. They want to be more embedded in our decision-making process at a neighborhood level. And so I fully expect that staff are going to come back with some proposals of how that would happen. And then the very people those proposals are about will have opinions, and we've got to go and get them. We might as well recognize today that we're going to have to go and collect the opinions on what would be proposed in November, or what you're going to end up with is one of those moments where council is quick about it, and a newspaper article emerges 2 days before council about something people realize has a big impact on their lives, and our email networks go nuts, our phones ring off the wall, and we all start debating each other in the hallways. That we'll have that type of reaction unless we let them know from the get-go. When those proposals come, we are planning on having one last round to talk to you. yes, there's a financial impact. We might as well know what it is. But I'll say this regarding financial impact. There's nothing more important than what we're doing in this committee. And yes, it costs. Every minute of deliberation costs money. Every recorded vote costs money. They're sitting here costing money to do this important work right now. But I think we have to decide whether or not that is important to the future or not. That last time, that over 10 years ago time we had a governance review, it was a very full governance review. It led to the robust mayor model you have now, the executive committee you have now, the compensation of the councillors, certain election reforms. It was an important piece of work done in 2007, I believe, and there was an expert panel chaired by Brian Tobin on the councillor pieces. There was an expert panel on the piece around the executive committee. There were back and forth tables between the city manager's office and the province because they cared what we did and they didn't want to at the end be the bad guy not giving the permission. And so they were included in it. That all cost money. And all for good because it has caused us to be able to function for the last almost 12 years. So yeah, it's going to cost a little money, but it's the most important work we can do is figuring out whether or not we're transacting our business in a way that gives the community faith and trust and a feeling of inclusion. I can't think of anything better to spend money on. So let's find out how much that money would be in November and then make decisions from there. I'm going to be supporting that motion. Thank you.
And any other speakers to the item? I will speak very briefly. I am going to express some concern, actually, with the motion. There's pieces I agree with in spirit, and I'd like to see the financials definitely come forward, but the concern I have is this. There's not a lot of time between now and November. That report has to be tabled at that point in time. It's directed in the motion. What I am worried about is that it will require the staff to zoom in on particular issues of which they can bring to a depth of research, and in doing so, they will then define the issues. I think that's the work of this committee. So they're not going to be able to respond to all of the things that were put into this report, and they're going to have to pick and choose the ones that they've got to bring that level of detail that Councillor Perks has brought forward. And I'm really worried about that because there may be something in there that gets missed that's important to me. For that reason, I prefer not to add this layer of responsibility to them and give them the flexibility that they need in their report. It wasn't a recommendation to us today. I appreciate what Councillor Perks is trying to achieve. He's trying to sharpen some issues and get them to the point of debate here and give us some information that we need to understand to go further on. But I'm really worried in doing so and putting it on the shoulders of the public service that they're going to filter the issues further, and I'll lose my chance as a committee member to do that job. What I fully expect is going to happen out of the next committee meeting is to create other work and other projects. I don't know where the forum is going to be, if it's going to be here or elsewhere. So therefore, I'm going to be respectfully in opposition of Councillor Perks' motion. With that, are there any other speakers? So I'll call on Councillor Perks' motion to be put up. Those that are in favor? That's 3. Those that are opposed? That passes. And with that, do we have item as amended? No, that was... So that is the single motion on it. Thank you very much. Good day to everybody.